Chapter 197. In the end, nothing happened that night. Lu Chun and White Lotus parted ways in the dark forest. They went their own ways, and went their separate ways. When the beautiful girl disappeared into the forest like a ghost, Lu Chun brought Atsu to Flying Goose platform, and returned to his wooden house. Late at night, the clouds parted and the moon appeared. A faint ray of moonlight shone on the windowsill, and shone on Lu Chun and Atsu. Atsu looked up at the sky. The crescent moon was like a hook, while Lu Chun stared at Atsu. After a while, he stretched out his hand and gently touched Atsu's back. Atsu turned its head and glanced at him. Lu Chun frowned slightly. After a while he suddenly said, "You can't stay on this Kunlun mountain anymore." Atsu's only eye flickered. Lu Chun's hand gently stroked Atsu's body. Its fur was soft and smooth like black satin. However, under this smoothness, there were pieces of bulging flesh and bones. There was blood that flowed extremely fast, and there was the sound of a strong beating heart. It was an unfamiliar power that was slowly gathering in this black dog's body. One day in the future, it would finally burst out. "I didn't expect you to become like this." Lu Chun gently touched Atsu and whispered, "I just wanted to save your life at that time, but there was really no other way." White Lotus, that little girl, always thought that what you had was the blood-feeding secret method. In fact, that was not the case at all. What I used that day was the devil cult's reincarnation formation, and the blood soul crystal fragments that I condensed with my evil method. At that time, I only thought of prolonging your life. But I didn't expect that you could actually absorb the blood soul crystal fragments and activate all the potential of your bloodline. This result is almost exactly the same as the blood-feeding secret art, so she's mistaken. Lu Chun smiled and said, "Atsu, I think your father, whom you have never met, must be an extremely powerful demonic beast. That's why he could give you such a strong bloodline." Atsu leaned forward. It wasn't clear if it understood Lu Chun's words, but it didn't say a word from beginning to end. Lu Chun didn't mind. He raised his head and looked out the window, looking at the moon high up in the sky. After a while he said softly, "You can only stay for another 10 days at most. When the night of the full moon arrives, you won't be able to endure it anymore. Before that you must go down the mountain." The next morning, the sky was bright. When Lu Chun walked out of the wooden house, he saw Xian's figure walking quickly from the foot of the mountain. Although she told Lu Chun that she would come back to see him as soon as possible, but in fact these days Su Qingjun hadn't come back. As for the reason, Lu Chun actually knew very well that Sumo's situation was actually far worse than when she came out of the martyr's grave that day. Mind manipulating spell was a very overbearing spell, but it couldn't be said to be evil or evil. In fact, similar methods existed in both the righteous faction and the devil cult. But firstly, it was very difficult to practice, and secondly, it was very easy to backfire on oneself. So there weren't many people who practiced it. Needless to say, there were many madmen in the devil cult. As for the righteous faction, there were also people who practiced similar spells, but almost all of them were in Fuyunji under Zheng Xianmeng's command. After all, this kind of spell was almost of no help to the cultivator's own cultivation and strength, but the danger was not small. Most of the time, it could only be used as a means of interrogation. Lu Chun didn't know much about the other halls of Zheng Xianmeng, but he knew Fuyunji like the back of his hand. That day he saw that Sumo was cast with an extremely overbearing mind-manipulating spell, and her mind was damaged. Moreover, the person who cast the spell was very ruthless and ruthless. It seemed that in order to get what he knew, he didn't care about Sumo's life at all. At that time, Lu Chun felt a little strange. He felt that he didn't seem to go so far, otherwise he would directly fall out with the Su family. With the Su family's current reputation and Su Qingjuan's advancement to Jin Dan, doing so would directly become a life and death enemy, which was really stupid. Until later he saw the person who looked at the corpse. For a moment, he almost thought that the person who looked at the corpse was a spy sent by Zheng Xianmeng Fuyunji to the Kunlun party. Compared to the various things around Lu Chun these days, whether it was people or things, all seemed to be hazy and gloomy. Only Xian that he saw this morning was bright. She bathed in the bright morning light, walking briskly. When she saw Lu Chun standing on the Fian platform, she suddenly laughed, then waved her hand vigorously, and ran over to him. The sunlight shone on her face, reflecting an unusually bright brilliance. The fresh mountain wind also seemed to follow her, swirling and dancing, blowing over this mountain peak. "Brother Lu." Exin called out to him with a smile. Lu Chen nodded to her, revealing a trace of a smile, and said, "Why are you here?" "Oh, Sister Su sent someone to pass a message, asking me to come and see you," said Exin with a smile. Lu Chen slightly raised his eyebrows and said, "What happened to her, asking you to pass a message for her?" Exin sighed, showing a trace of helplessness on her face, and said to Lu Chen, "Sister Su has something to do at home. She really can't leave, but I heard from her that you seem to be injured, and she is also a little worried, so she asked me to come and see you. Sister Su also said that if you feel that your injury is really serious, let me take you to Baichaotang first to have a look, and don't worry about anything. In the future, when she returns to the mountain, she will naturally return this favor." Lu Chen smiled and said, "She is a careful woman." Exin said with a smile, "That's right, Sister Su is a good person. I say, Brother Lu, you are really lucky. If it were someone else, it would be impossible for them to treat a part-time disciple like this." Lu Chen glanced at her, and suddenly asked with a smile, "What about you?" "Ah," Lu Chen asked, "if you also encountered the same situation, would you be concerned about an ordinary part-time disciple like her?" Exin frowned her beautiful eyebrows, seeming to be a little distressed and hesitant, and after a moment of hesitation she stammered, "Well, me, probably not." Lu Chen laughed out loud, and pointed at Exin saying, "You are a bad woman." "Hey!" Exin suddenly became a little angry, and glared at Lu Chen shouting, "Why do you ask me these things for no reason? Well, most people don't care about a part-time disciple they are not close to, okay?" Lu Chen shrugged and said, "It's over. It seems that if something really happens to me in the future, I can't count on you." Exin's cheeks blushed, but she shook her head and said, "That won't happen, Brother Lu. You are different from others. I will definitely take care of you." Lu Chen was a little surprised, and looked at Exin, and said with a smile, "Really?" Exin nodded and said, "Really. You are alone. If you are really beaten to death, won't it be very miserable? And you used to be very good to me. In the future when I have the ability, I will definitely take care of you, don't worry." Lu Chen saw that she was particularly serious, and only felt that it was interesting, and his heart was inexplicably touched, but soon he still smiled and interrupted, and said, Okay, then from today on, I will say that you are a good woman." Exin looked at her with a mixture of annoyance and joy, then looked around and asked, "Where's Atu?" Lu Chen turned back and whistled. After a while, a black shadow sprang out from the mountain forest behind Flying Goose Terrace, and it was Black Dog. Seeing Exin standing beside Lu Chen from afar, Atsu immediately shook its head and wagged its tail, and quickly ran over. Exin also let out a crisp laughter, and greeted it with a chuckle. On the way, she hugged Atsu, who was rushing over, and hugged it in her arms. "Woof woof woof, woof woof woof." Atsu barked repeatedly, looking very excited and happy, probably because it had not seen Exin for a while. On this mountain of Kunlun, the people who could really make it feel close to, and the people who could completely let down its guard, were only Lu Chen and Exin in front of it. Exin was also very happy. She hugged Atsu, and then pressed her hands hard on its back and head, as if she wanted to double what she had not seen in these days. She laughed and suddenly screamed. It turned out that Atsu was too excited, and kept jumping, and accidentally crushed Exin. Exin patted Atu's head. Although Atu's current appearance was extremely ferocious and hideous, in her eyes, he was no different from the black puppy from back then. She even laughed and shouted, "Oh, Stinky Atsu, why are you so heavy now? How many kilograms have you gained?" Woof 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 woof. Atsu kept rubbing against her, and its tail was also wagging wildly, as if it was venting the joy in its heart. After a while, the person and the dog calmed down a little. Exin smiled and patted Atsu's head, then turned to Lu Chen and said with a smile, "Brother Lu, do you think Atsu has grown a lot?" "Grown up?" Lu Chen was a little surprised, but after hearing what she said, He took a closer look and really felt that Atsu seemed to have grown a lot. Then he seemed to think of something, and his face became slightly solemn, but soon returned to normal. He smiled and said, "It should be. This stupid dog doesn't know anything. It only thinks about eating." After a while, Exian finally came over and said to Lu Chen, "Brother Lu, are you really okay now?" Lu Chen said, "Yes, I'm fine. Don't worry. Oh, I'll tell Sister Sue about it," Exian said with a smile. Lu Chen looked at Exian, and suddenly thought of something else. Back in the dark grave, Exian's master, Dongfeng Tao, suddenly appeared there, and seemed to have a fierce fight with the mysterious corpse watcher. His eyes flickered slightly and he asked Exian, "Oh right, you always ask me, how have you been recently?" Exian said, "Pretty good." Lu Chen smiled and said, "What about your master? Did he teach you any amazing skills recently?" "Not yet." Exian looked a little depressed and said, "Master said that I need to build a solid foundation, and then practice higher-level magic arts. Oh right, he also said that he will take me to a mysterious place soon, to broaden my horizons." Lu Chen's body suddenly shook, and his eyes instantly lit up. Chapter 198. "Oh, where are you going?" Lu Chen asked Exian. Exian shook her head and said, "Master didn't say. He only said that I've never been there before. I also want to know, but I've asked Master several times, but he just smiled and didn't say anything." Lu Chen lowered his head and pondered for a moment. Then his gaze slowly softened, and he smiled somewhat self-deprecatingly. He thought that he had been a shadow for a long time, and stayed in the dark for a long time. It seemed that his whole person had become a little strange. Dongfeng Tao had just casually said a few words to his female disciple. Perhaps he really wanted to take Exian to broaden her horizons, but when he heard it, he felt that there was something wrong. "Maybe I'm black-hearted," Lu Chen muttered in a low voice. Exian, who was next to him, didn't hear it clearly. She asked curiously, "Brother Lu, what did you say?" Lu Chen shook his head and said with a smile, "Nothing. That's right, this Kunlun mountain range is so big. Perhaps there are many magical and magnificent paradises that we haven't heard of. Not to mention other things, just the 4 strange peaks floating in the sky are rare in the world. If we can go up and take a look, it will also be a kind of blessing." Exian laughed and said, "Brother Lu, you're right. But I think it's most likely impossible between the clouds in the sky. Our sect has long had a rule that only Yuanying Jinren can set foot on the 4 strange peaks of spring, summer, autumn, and winter. I'm still far from that." Lu Chen's heart suddenly moved. He asked Exian, "Speaking of which, I heard that there are also exceptions." Exian was startled. "Brother Lu, you mean?" Lu Chen looked around and saw that there was no one around. He lowered his voice and said, "It's Hakushin Jinkuan's disciple. Hakushin Jinkuan has 3 disciples. His eldest disciple is our sect leader, Reverend Idle Month, who is at the Yuanying realm. As for the other 2, Zhuoxian is said to be Jin Dan Friar, and White Lotus is even worse. She is about the same as us. But I heard that these 2 fellow sect members without nascent soul realm cultivation often go up to the winter peak between the clouds in the sky to cultivate." Exian was stunned for a moment, and suddenly became nervous. She grabbed Lu Chen's hand and said to him seriously, "Hey Brother Lu, are you stupid? How could such words be spoken so carelessly? That's a perfected cultivator, a soul formation perfected cultivator, brother." Lu Chen looked at her and suddenly smiled. He nodded and said, I understand. Don't worry." Exian then let out a sigh of relief. But very quickly, it seemed that she was also a little lost in thought by Lu Chen's words. She thought for a moment and then slowly said, I think it's probably because of perfected cultivator's face." Lu Chen coughed and said seriously, "Friend Exian, I understand what you mean. You are saying that although the Kunlun party has strict rules, but at most it can only restrict Yuanying perfected cultivators. 4 soul formation perfected cultivators, these rules are useless." "Hey!" Exian jumped up in fright. Her face turned pale. She stammered, "Brother Lu, you can't speak carelessly. I don't mean that." Lu Chen laughed out loud, but halfway through his laughter suddenly stopped. He was holding his chest with his hand, but there was a trace of pain on his face. Exian was shocked again. She hurriedly supported him and said, "Brother Lu, are you okay?" Just as she finished speaking, her body suddenly trembled, as if she suddenly thought of something. She instantly turned pale with fright and said in shock, "Aya, could it be that you said something bad about Hakushin Jinkun just now, and he sensed it, so he gave you a punishment?" Lu Chen rolled his eyes. After taking 2 deep breaths, the pain on his face subsided and his body stabilized. Then he angrily hit Exian's head and said, "Nonsense! Do you think that perfected monarchs are immortals? There are so many people in the world who know of them. Who knows how many people have called out their names all day long? If they were to investigate them one by one, then perfected spirit-severing monarchs wouldn't be able to do anything else. They would just be annoyed to death every day." Exian was stunned for a moment, and said, "If you put it like that, it seems to make a little bit of sense." "Nonsense." Exian suddenly looked a lot braver. After sticking out her tongue, her expression also became a lot smarter. After thinking for a moment, she mysteriously pulled Lu Chen and said in a low voice, "If that's really the case, it seems that the 2 disciples of Hakushin Jinkun have indeed violated the sect rules." Lu Chen said, "I said it just now, but there are so many people in the Kunlun party, but no one has come out to say anything." Exian shrugged and said, "Brother Lu, you are also talking nonsense. Who would dare to say anything? That is a perfected spirit-severing monarch. Besides, even the current sect leader, Perfected Idol Month, is also his eldest disciple. Those who still dare to say something like that are either stupid or out of their minds." Lu Chen looked at her and said with a smile, "Hey, you are not stupid recently." "I have never been stupid," Exian said indignantly. Lu Chen also ignored Exian's protest and said to himself, "It seems that being a disciple of a perfected spirit-severing monarch is still more comfortable. I am naturally much stronger than others." "Yes," Exian said enviously, and then teased Lu Chen. "Brother Lu, our Kunlun party has 2 perfected monarchs. In addition to Hakushin Jinkun, there is also perfected monarch Tianlan, who has not yet had a disciple. If you have some sort of fortuitous encounter and are able to become his disciple, then wouldn't it be great? At that time, wouldn't you be able to get whatever you want and ascend to whatever peak you want?" Lu Chen thought for a moment and said with a nod, "You are right. How about this? When I become his disciple in the future, I will not care about the sect rules, and secretly take you to the strange peaks in the sky to see the scenery, okay?" Exian was laughing so hard that she was rocking back and forth. Her giggles were like the crisp sound of wind chimes. She pointed at Lu Chen and laughed so hard that she couldn't say anything. After a long while, she finally caught her breath, but she was still laughing. She smiled at Lu Chen and said, Okay. Anyway, I don't think I'll have much chance to become a nascent soul Taoist master in this lifetime. When I'm really old, I'll wait for you to take me up." Lu Chen spread out his hands and said, "Why do you have to wait so long? Just wait for a few years. When I become successful and famous, I will take you up to play." Wahaha. Exian laughed so hard that she bent over, laughing so hard that she could not catch her breath. She pointed at Lu Chen and shook her head desperately, then nodded repeatedly and said, Okay, Brother Lu, I am counting on you." Lu Chen chuckled. For some reason, he suddenly felt his mood lighten up. He felt that the sky was clear, that the green mountains were black, and that the sea of clouds was magnificent. The future seemed to have suddenly become beautiful. He smiled and looked into the distance. The mountain wind blew over the 2 smiling people and lifted their clothes. The branch of Hakushin Jinkun holds the power and is the strongest branch in the Kunlun party. They have been arrogant for a long time. Everyone, you and I are all disciples of Kunlun. What do we rely on for 5,000 years? It is not the number of geniuses, not the number of people, and not the occasional appearance of a perfected lord of Huashan realm. The biggest reason why the Kunlun party can be passed down to this day is because of the various rules passed down by the ancestors of the past generations. For thousands of years, how many famous sects in the cultivation world of the central region have risen and fallen? Rising and falling, have we not seen enough? Why is it that only our Kunlun party is prosperous? Rules. There is only one word, rules. A deafening voice echoed in a secret quiet room under the eldest prince of Baichaotang. Someone was speaking passionately, and the others were listening carefully, nodding, or silent. There were 5 people in the quiet room, and all of them were Yuanying Jinren. Even in a first-class sect like the Kunlun party, these 5 people were a powerful force that should not be underestimated. The 2 sitting in the front were naturally the 2 Jinren of Baichaotang. The one who spoke passionately just now was Jinren Mingzhu, while Jinren Qiandeng, who was sitting in the main seat, smiled and nodded calmly, as if he did not feel that Jinren Mingzhu's words were disrespectful to Hakushin Jinkuan. Apart from the 2 of them, the other 3 Yuanying Jinren had different expressions, and their expressions were slightly complicated. Jinren Qiandeng's bright eyes swept across the crowd, and then he smiled and said, "What junior brother Mingzhu just said, I believe all of you have the same feeling these days. Let's not talk about other things, but in the supreme forbidden area of the vault of heaven and clouds, only Jinren Yuanying can enter. Now that Zhuoxian and White Lotus have set foot on the winter peak, it is indeed inappropriate." A fair-skinned man sitting on his right nodded and said, "Senior brother Qiandeng is right. I, Guangyang, feel the same. In fact, it's not just us. As far as I know, there are many Yuanying Jinren on the spring and autumn peaks who are dissatisfied with this. It's just that the other side is too powerful, so no one dares to voice their anger." "That's right." At this time, another Yuanying Jinren sitting opposite to Jinren Guangyang said, "But there's nothing we can do about it. Now that Hakushin Jinkuan is guarding the sect, and the Jinren sect master is his disciple, the Bai clan's henchmen are everywhere in the sect, and we can't do anything about it." Daoist Master Qiandeng smiled and said, "Even so, it doesn't mean that there's no chance of a turnaround. After all, this foundation is passed down by the patriarch. As disciples of Kunlun sect, it's our duty to clean up the roots." As he said this, he turned to look at the Yuanying Jinren who had been sitting in the last row with his head bowed. He asked with a smile, "What do you think, junior brother Muyuan?" The last Yuanying Jinren slowly raised his head. His expression was solemn and his brows were tightly furrowed, but he didn't say anything for a while. The quiet room seemed to have fallen into a moment of silence. The gazes of the other Yuanying Jinren Qiandeng quickly fell on Masato Kuhara. The air was silent, but it seemed to have suddenly become heavy. After a while, Masato Kuhara looked at Jinren Qiandeng and said, "Senior brother Qiandeng, I have something to say first." "Please speak, junior brother. I understand all of your intentions. I'm sure all of you are aware of my current situation. It can't get any worse. If there's a chance, it's not a bad idea to take a gamble. But," he raised his brows and said in a low voice, "I'll say it again. If true Lord Tianlan doesn't personally promise me, I won't participate in this matter." Chapter 199. Enlightened Master Qiandeng furrowed his brows and revealed an awkward expression. The enlightened masters next to him also fell silent. The atmosphere in the quiet room was somewhat stiff. After a moment, Masato Kuhara softened his tone and looked at enlightened Master Qiandeng with a sincere expression. "Senior brother Qiandeng, you and I have known each other for many years. Although we aren't friends of life and death, we should at least know each other well. I'm sure you know what kind of person I am." Enlightened Master Qiandeng slowly nodded. Masato Kuhara looked around at the crowd and continued in a low voice, "Everyone here is a discerning person, so there's no need for pleasantries. The Kuanji branch is extremely powerful while my Tieji branch is in decline. Under normal circumstances, not to mention that we don't dare to get involved. Even if the Kuanji's power struggle turns the world upside down, my Tieji branch may not be able to do anything. Including me, there are only 4 Yuanying enlightened masters in our Tieji branch. Apart from my disciple Su Qingjun, there are almost no outstanding talents among the disciples below the Yuanying stage." He said indifferently, "Everyone, you've dragged me into this matter for the sake of these 4 old bones of mine. However, this is no trivial matter. Once it starts, there is no way out. This is tantamount to me betting all of the legacies passed down by Patriarch Tailuo. I really can't afford to lose in this matter. Enlightened Master Qiandeng pondered for a moment and suddenly said, Junior brother Kihara, since you are so frank, then I won't be polite and will tell you something unpleasant. Masato Kihara said, Senior brother, please go ahead. Enlightened Master Qiandeng said, As you said before, the Tieji branch has indeed declined in recent years. But if we continue to play it safe, we may be able to linger on for some time, but I'm afraid it will be difficult for us to prosper in the foreseeable future. I wonder if you have any objections to what I have said? Kihara Jinren remained silent. He did not agree, nor did he agree. Taoist Master Qiandeng didn't care about this. He only looked at him deeply and said, Junior brother, let me give you a word of advice. Instead of dragging on and being half dead, why not fight with all his might? Martial Uncle Tianlan has already issued a decree earlier. As long as you, Taiji, contribute to this important matter, once it succeeds, you will definitely be rewarded. Regardless of other things, the four of you, Shenren Yuanying, will definitely be arranged to cultivate in the sky. Masato Kihara's expression changed slightly as he gritted his teeth. In the Kunlun party, there had long been a sect rule, which was that those who were not in the Yuanying realm were not allowed to go up to the four strange peaks between the clouds in the sky to train. But in reality, because the difference in strength was too great, those who could enter the four floating peaks of spring, summer, autumn, and winter were all disciples of Kuanji, and the only four spiritual masters of Taiji had never been able to go up. Of course, this was unfair, but no one in the Kunlun party had ever dared to openly mention this matter. The reason was actually very simple. Needless to say anything else, one only needed to look at the background of the two supreme deity transformation stage sovereigns in the sect. I understand what you're saying, Masato Kihara said to Taoist Master Qiandeng, but this matter is of great importance, and I can't be careless. Hakushin Jinkuan's lineage is powerful and has countless henchmen in the sect. It won't be easy to become enemies with them. He lightly pointed in a certain direction and said, Let's not talk about other things. Even if we do well, Hakushin Jinkuan is still on the winter peak. How can we solve this? This matter must be personally handled by perfected Lord Tianlan. Only then we have a little chance. If he doesn't appear, we Taiji will not get involved in this muddy water. Qiandeng gently exhaled and said, I understand what you mean. Masato Kihara slightly lowered her head and said, Senior brother, please don't blame me for my rudeness. Taoist Master Qiandeng waved his hand and said, It's human nature. Don't mind it. He paused for a moment and then said, I received the news yesterday. A few days before the next full moon, Uncle Master Tianlan will rush back from Zhengxianmeng to participate in the annual sect council. Let's see when the time comes. Maybe he will talk to you himself. Masato Kihara slightly bowed and nodded. Thank you for your understanding, senior brother. Thank you for perfected Lord Tianlan's kindness. Taoist Master Qiandeng looked at the crowd and suddenly raised his voice a little. He said, Everyone, I've already told you about this important matter. I'm sure everyone is aware of the cause of this matter. When ancestor Tian Hong was still alive, everyone in the sect knew that the most beloved disciple of the founder was Uncle Master Tianlan. Even the Taoist name Tian was passed on to him. The meaning couldn't be clearer. He wanted Uncle Master Tianlan to lead the Kunlun party and inherit the position of sect leader. However, things took a turn for the worse. Ancestor Tian Hong passed away unexpectedly, leaving only Uncle Master Bai Chun and Tianlan. In the end, it was Hakushin Jinkuan who inherited all the legacies of the sect, while Uncle Master Tianlan was forced to Zhengxianmeng to fight to the death with those fierce and ruthless devil cult monsters. I don't need to say more about the meaning of this. Taoist Master Qiandeng sighed and then said, However, many years later, Hakushin Jinkuan passed the position of sect leader to his eldest disciple. Since then his power has grown. Now the discipline of the sect has been corrupted, and there are many villains and spies. However, Idle Month and the others are powerless. They can't resist the strong enemies and revitalize the sect. Internally, many mediocre villains are raised to gain prestige, causing the reputation of the Kunlun party to decline day by day. What's funny is that Idle Month and the others think that the sect is thriving and boast about it. They are shameless. Uncle Master Tianlon once said to me that although he is indifferent and doesn't care about fame and benefits, he can't sit back and watch when the sect is gradually falling into a dangerous situation. Otherwise, how can he face ancestor Tian Hong after 100 years? He also won't have the face to face the founders of the Kunlun party. Set things right and clean up the roots. This is what Uncle Master Tianlon wants to do. At the end of his speech, Qian Deng's expression was solemn, but he said it resolutely and decisively. Immediately, the expressions of the people around him tightened, and they all nodded in agreement. The days when Su Qingjun wasn't on the Fian Terrace seemed particularly cold and cheerless. However, perhaps because he was already used to this kind of loneliness, Lu Chen didn't feel sad. Instead, he felt a lot more at ease. However, after midnight, Lu Chen led the Atsu sect down the Nanlu Mountain Road and went straight to Kunwa City. When he came to Kunwa City, he actually only had one place to go most of the time, to look for Old Ma in the Black Hill Pavilion. This time, when he passed by the place where the murder happened on the street, he looked a little tired. That house was no longer available for rent. After all, someone had died in the courtyard, and there were actually a few unfamiliar men guarding the door in the house, preventing outsiders from entering or leaving at will. Perhaps there were some bad-tempered cultivators who wanted to cause trouble. But soon, everyone saw or knew that these guards were all disciples of the Kunlun party. Most of the individual cultivators in Kunwa City didn't know who the person who died in the door was, so there were all kinds of guesses. Some of them even made people laugh until they scratched their heads. For example, the person who died in the house was an extremely powerful spiritual master Yuanying. What kind of secret technique was he hiding in the city? Or perhaps someone thought that a genius of the Kunlun party that only appeared once in 100 years lived here, and was afraid that he would be discovered and died prematurely, so he hid here. However, these words were actually considered polite. The most outrageous thing was that some people even said that there were women's clothes in this mysterious house. Perhaps they were the old lovers of the spiritual master Idol Month, the current spiritual master of the Kunlun party. This kind of words could be said to be malicious, but of course, it was also possible that some people were really stupid and wanted to discredit spiritual master Idol Month. Of course, Lu Chen knew what happened in the house, but he naturally didn't know some specific details. One of the reasons he came to Kunwa City today was to ask Old Ma about what happened that day in detail. But this time, the most important thing for Lu Chen in Kunwa City was still Atsu. Although Atsu's appearance didn't seem to have changed much, Lu Chen knew that under this black dog's fur, signs of valiance and ferocity had gradually begun to show. In any case, it was no longer suitable to keep it on the mountain of Kunlun. Otherwise, in the future, Atsu might turn the mountain upside down. As for those powerful Yuanying spiritual masters of the Kunlun party, if they wanted to deal with such a black dog, they had almost endless powerful methods. Lu Chen didn't even dare to think about what would happen to Atsu if it really caused trouble in the future. He took one last look at the house guarded by the disciples of the Heavenly Soldier Hall of the Kunlun party, then left with Atsu, heading to the shabby and deserted Black Hill Pavilion. Old Ma was very happy to see Lu Chen, but after hearing Lu Chen's instructions, he suddenly looked embarrassed and said, "Lu Chen, you see, now that everything here is under repair, we don't have much money left. As for me, I actually don't have much interest in raising a dog, so," Lu Chen said indifferently, "I'll pay." Old Ma suddenly stood up and said righteously, "So of course this dog can stay. I will take care of it." Lu Chen smiled and didn't care. He just said, "In fact, you don't have to take care of it for too long. You just need to feed it something every day. Also, don't let it run out to the streets casually. It might cause trouble if it's not handled properly." "Trouble? What kind of trouble?" Old Ma looked at Lu Chen with some doubts and said, "Isn't this an ordinary dog? What kind of trouble can there be?" Lu Chen waved his hand and said, "This matter is settled. In short, take good care of it for the next few days. When the matter is settled, live until a few days before the night of the full moon. I will find a time to send it away, the farther the better." Old Ma frowned and suddenly looked at Lu Chen. He asked, "What do you want to do when the night of the full moon arrives?" Chapter 200. Lu Chen glanced at him and said, Isn't it about the traitor of the evil cult? Old Ma pointed at Atsu and said, what does that have to do with it? Why must it be sent away before the night of the full moon? Our top priority right now is to find the traitor of the evil cult. At this critical moment, do you have to divert your attention to send away a dog? He paused and looked at Lu Chen with a frown. I think you're a little strange today. Did something happen? Lu Chen shook his head and said, nothing, I'm fine. Old Ma stared at him for a moment, then nodded and said, you're an old man, I won't say anything unnecessary. Anyway, be careful. Lu Chen stood up and patted him on the shoulder, then turned around and walked towards the gate. Atsu wanted to follow him, but Lu Chen stopped it. After thinking for a while, he brought it to the courtyard and gave it something to eat. He stroked Atsu's back and whispered something to it. He didn't know if Atsu understood, but it just sat on the ground and didn't follow. When Lu Chen walked through the narrow passageway, he looked back and could still see the black dog quietly sitting in the quiet courtyard, staring at his back. There was a faint light flashing in its only eye. Lu Chen laughed and waved at Atsu. Atsu swung its tail and barked at him. Su Qingjun returned to the mountain after a few days. When Lu Chen saw her, she was walking over from the mountain path. Her face looked a little haggard and her expression was a little heavy. However, when she saw Lu Chen's figure, she still revealed a trace of a smile. She quickened her footsteps and walked over. She sized him up and said, are you all right? Lu Chen loosened his muscles and said with a smile, I'm fine, I'm fine. Su Qingjun showed a gratified smile, then a little apologetic and said, I should have come back to see you earlier, but I couldn't leave home. Lu Chen waved his hand and said with a smile, it's okay, I'm fine. But what happened at home? Did something urgent happen? Su Qingjun hesitated for a moment and then said softly, there's no need to hide it from you. My brother, Su Mo, had a relapse after returning home that night. He was delirious, and his mouth was full of nonsense. His condition was terrible, as if she didn't finish her words, as if she didn't know what to say. She probably couldn't bear to use the word idiot on her brother. Lu Chen said and didn't say anything else. He just accompanied her to walk around the Flying Goose Terrace. They gradually walked to the edge of the cliff and looked at the vast sea of clouds in front of them. As the mountain breeze blew, Su Qingjun sighed and said, my parents have always loved my brother the most, so they were naturally heartbroken to see him in such a miserable state. Then they went around looking for people to treat him, and I also had to help them ask for help. As for you, I was also a little worried that you would also be in the same situation when you went back. That would be terrible. But I really couldn't leave in that situation, so I had to ask younger sister Exin to help me see you. But when I heard that you were safe and sound, I was relieved. Lu Chen nodded and said, I'm fine, you don't need to worry. After he said that, he muttered to himself for a moment, then glanced at Su Qingjun and said, right, I heard something else happened a few days ago. That He Yi's brother He Gang met with an accident in Kunwu City? Su Qingjun smiled bitterly and said, yes, it did happen. In fact, this is one of the reasons why I can't return to the mountain. Originally, when my brother was tossed around like that, my Su family was furious and we were unwilling to let He go, but this incident happened. In the end, it seemed like overnight, that senior martial brother He became the victim. Everyone thought that our Su family paid for the murderer to take revenge. Lu Chen thought for a moment then asked Su Qingjun, it really wasn't done by your Su family? Su Qingjun rolled her eyes at him and said angrily, of course it wasn't. Didn't I just say it? Lu Chen laughed and said, I'm just joking. But you have to say, when I heard about this, my first reaction was indeed to think of your family. This matter is too coincidental. Now many people in the sect are talking about it in private, and they all think it was done by your family. With a gloomy expression, Su Qingjun said somewhat helplessly, who said it wasn't? It's a pity that we can't come out and explain it. This matter is quite strange, but senior martial brother He lost his younger brother, and he has Dukhan Jinren, and the sect head standing behind him. Now it's them who are in the right. Our Su family really can't vent our anger, so we can only swallow it for the time being. Lu Chen looked at the woman beside him, and saw that there was a slight annoyance on her face. Her chest was heaving up and down, probably because she was still angry in her heart. But when the light from the sky shone down and the cool breeze blew past her temples, her beautiful hair fluttering in the wind, she was still as elegant and beautiful as before. There was even a feeling that after being separated for so many days, she seemed to be even more beautiful than before. No one spoke at the edge of the cliff for a while. It was quiet like a paradise. Su Qingjuan's mood gradually calmed down. After a while, she suddenly blushed and said to Lu Chen somewhat apologetically, "I'm sorry. I originally wanted to come back and see how your injuries are, but in the end, it turned into me complaining to you." Lu Chen smiled and said, "No matter, I'm fine. It doesn't matter if I listen. But you don't need to be too angry." After saying that, he paused for a moment and said again, "Then this matter, you're just going to let it go like this?" Su Qingjun suddenly sneered and said, "Of course not. I only have this one younger brother. He was muddle-headed and was messed up like this. Whether he will recover in the future is still unknown. How can I let this matter go like this? Besides, I also heard rumors that he's senior martial brother. He is very sad about his younger brother's death. Although he didn't say anything excessive, but I guess with his personality, I'm afraid that he won't be willing to let this matter go. In short, no matter what, our Su family and his surname this enmity is formed." Su Qingjun said indifferently. Lu Chen frowned and said, "It sounds really troublesome." Su Qingjun said, "It doesn't matter if it's troublesome or not. Previously, our Su family temporarily endured it out of consideration for the sect master and the other big shots. We didn't want to cause any misunderstandings. But if senior martial brother, he really wants to shed all pretense of cordiality and fight, our Su family can't possibly be afraid of him." When saying this, Su Qingjuan's expression was stern, but there was also a trace of pride. She was probably a big family that had been passed down for many years, so she should have a bit of confidence and confidence. Lu Chen nodded and echoed a few words. Su Qingjun shook her head and said, "Actually, this matter is like this now. But the most hateful thing is that person who plotted in the dark. He found this opportunity to deliberately provoke hatred between us. It's really hateful." As she said this, she gritted her teeth and looked at the sea of clouds in the distance. She said to Lu Chen, "If I can find this person in the future, I will definitely kill him." Lu Chen was silent for a moment, then he smiled and nodded, saying, "You're right. This person is too evil. He should be killed." When the sky turned dark, Su Qingjun had already returned to her cave to rest. The Fian Terrace was peaceful. A bright moon rose in the night sky and sprinkled its moonlight down. Atu's figure was nowhere to be seen in the wooden hut, making Lu Chen feel a bit more empty than before. He wondered if Atu, who was in Kunwa City at the foot of the mountain, was also looking at the moon like this. He stared at the bright moon in the night sky and frowned slightly as if he was thinking about something. But soon his expression suddenly changed. He sat up and looked outside the window. Sure enough, after a moment, a petite figure appeared in his field of vision. Lu Chen sighed and didn't get up. He just looked at the figure outside the window and said, "What are you doing here again?" That person came closer, and the moonlight illuminated her face. It was White Lotus. This young girl with an otherworldly beauty looked especially noble and beautiful under the moonlight, as if she was a fairy that descended from the sky. She didn't stand on ceremony with Lu Chen. She walked over and put her hand on the windowsill, then she directly jumped up and sat on it. She then looked down at the room, and was suddenly startled. She said, "Where's Atsu?" "I drove him away," Lu Chen said faintly. "That stupid dog is too stupid. It's annoying to look at." White Lotus snorted. Her face showed that she obviously didn't believe his words. But from this angle, Lu Chen suddenly discovered that the collar of White Lotus's clothes today was very high up, just covering most of her neck. As if she sensed Lu Chen's gaze, White Lotus smiled and reached out to touch her neck, said, "Thanks to you, that wound is very strange and it won't heal for a long time. Sometimes, I really wonder what your identity is. You always use these indescribable demonic methods." Lu Chen sat up straighter, his face revealed a solemn expression and said to White Lotus, "I am not an evil sect spy." White Lotus snorted. Although she looked somewhat disdainful, for some reason she seemed to believe his words. Lu Chen looked at the dark night outside, shook his head and said to White Lotus, "I say, you have nothing better to do than to run around all day. First, is it because your omnipotent master doesn't care about you? Second, this mountain still has a curfew. If you are seen by the patrolling disciples, wouldn't it be embarrassing?" White Lotus' face was full of disdain, said, "First, my master usually doesn't care about me. He has a lot of things to do and can't wait to cultivate every day. Second, curfew is a fart, sect rules are a fart. I am the direct disciple of a Huashan true monarch, not to mention those trash can't catch me. Even if they see me, what can they do to me?" Lu Chen was silent, then smiled bitterly and said, "You are so young but you can see it clearly." White Lotus sat high up on the windowsill, looked down at him and said, "Nonsense. People in this world are divided into high and low. How can those without ability sit on the same level as us? Why are you pretending to be a saint?" Lu Chen smiled and didn't say anything. He turned to look at the moon in the sky. The moon tonight was bright and full, illuminating a large part of the dark night sky. There were only 7 days left until the next full moon night. Chapter 201. Under the moonlight, that young girl sat on the windowsill of the wooden house with her feet dangling in the air, one hand on the windowsill, the other on her lap. The night breeze blew over faintly, ruffling the corner of her clothes. Occasionally her feet would gently kick a few times, as if lingering with the wind, and also like a child suddenly floating up, just for fun. On her lips, there was a sudden smile, light but gentle, just like what a 10-year-old girl should have. The night was deep, the moonlight was cold. For some reason, she still had no intention of leaving. She suddenly quietened down, not asking Lu Chen about Atsa's whereabouts, nor did she speak ill of Lu Chen. In that instant, Lu Chen suddenly had a very strange feeling that White Lotus was just sitting there playing. But of course Lu Chen would not really treat this girl as an ordinary 10-year-old girl. What a joke! With the vicious methods that she had displayed previously, Lu Chen felt that if his cultivation was slightly lacking, he would not be able to see the moon tonight. But this stalemate did not seem to be a solution. White Lotus did not seem to care at all, but this place was Lu Chen's wooden house. At least Lu Chen still wanted to sleep tonight. With an exceptionally dangerous girl like White Lotus sitting on the windowsill, no matter how brave Lu Chen was, he felt that he did not dare to close his eyes. So Lu Chen felt that he still had to speak to White Lotus, thinking that since everyone had nothing to say, wouldn't it be best to go back to their own homes and sleep? When he was about to speak, he suddenly heard a low humming sound coming from White Lotus's mouth, and slowly, she started to sing a little song. The crescent moon, seeing the acacia. Red clothes, dressing for whom? Yeah, time passes like water, white hair flustered. Seeing the red makeup in the morning, separated by 1,000 mountains at dusk. Yeah. This song was short and simple, and the meaning of the words was graceful. However, when she sang it, it carried a trace of loneliness and loneliness. She was like a lonely woman that was filled with deep thoughts, and it was completely unlike the feeling she should have at her age. But in the eyes of Lu Chen, who had seen White Lotus's vicious methods, he did not see White Lotus as a little girl. But even so, when he heard this song, he still felt a sudden and inexplicable trance. The moonlight shone on by Lian's beautiful face, making her seem like an otherworldly fairy. Her voice also seemed to reverberate through the 9 heavens. Her voice was light and translucent, almost reaching a state of perfection. Anyone who heard it would immediately be immersed in it, as if they were looking at the woman in the song that they longed for. The night was dim, the cold wind was silent, her voice gradually faded, and then disappeared. Lu Chen suddenly said, "This song, where did you learn it from?" White Lotus turned her head to look at him, and said, "Why do you ask?" After a pause she asked again, "How was my singing, was it good?" Lu Chen hesitated for a moment, but still nodded, and said, "It was really good. Your voice is extraordinary. This little song from your mouth can be said to be a little more celestial." Ah! White Lotus giggled, as if she was suddenly very happy, and then said to herself, "I said, a genius like me. How can there be anything that I can't do well? Even if it's singing, it must be the best." Lu Chen said softly, This song sounds a little familiar, as if I have heard it before. Can you tell me? White Lotus laughed, and then said, No. Lu Chen was startled and said, Why not? White Lotus said, Because I'm happy, I can do whatever I want. I don't want to tell you, so I won't tell you. Lu Chen was speechless. White Lotus looked at him, seemed to be a little happy, and then said with a little pride, Come on, you are lucky enough today. Let me tell you, in this world, no one can hear my song. You are the first, so you can go burn incense in the morning. Lu Chen was moved, looked at White Lotus and said, If that's the case, then my luck is really good. But I heard you sing so well, no matter who heard it, they will like it. Why no one else has heard it? White Lotus' face stiffened, and her eyes slightly drooped and said, No one is willing to listen. They all hope that I will. They all want me to practice hard and do something big. As she said that, it was as if a stone in her heart had been unintentionally moved. Her expression suddenly relaxed, and she raised her hands to stretch. Her face was languid, and she even tilted her head to one side in a strange manner. She then said, That's why I say, although you're not a good person, and you're full of evil tricks, it seems that only at your place can I sing and scold people freely. Isn't that right, bastard? Lu Chen heard her scolding, but he was not angry. After staring at her for a while, he suddenly shook his head, sighed, and said, You are so young. What kind of life did you live in the past? Hee, I just lied to you a few times, and you took it seriously. White Lotus suddenly laughed and pointed at Lu Chen, shook her head and said with a smile, Look at your silly face. Do you still want to comfort me, or save me from the sea of bitterness? Lu Chen shrugged, and did not speak. White Lotus jumped down from the windowsill, and waved at Lu Chen, saying, That dog has a secret I want to know. I will definitely come again. Don't try to avoid me. As she said this, she walked away with light footsteps. Lu Chen looked at her back, and saw her bouncing footsteps. It seemed that in this cold night, her mood was really much better than before. Probably, right? The day of the sect council on the 15th of this month was getting closer and closer. So recently, the Kunlun party had a more tense and solemn atmosphere. This kind of sect council was also a rule passed down by the ancestors. It was held once a year, to review the past and look forward to the future, and to evaluate many matters, including the redistribution of many resources and spiritual materials within the sect, so it could be said to be the most important matter in the Kunlun party. According to the rules of the Kunlun sect, cultivators above Jin Dan realm could attend the sect council, and all cultivators above Yuanying Zhenren must attend. Of course, supreme existences like deity transformation stage Zhenren still had special privileges. However, in the past few years, or to be exact, after Zhenren Idol Month became the sect leader, Hakushin Jinkuan would appear in the sect council every year. On the contrary, because Zhenren Tianlan was busy with many things in Zhangxianmeng, he did not come back to participate. Of course, the annual event had to be treated with caution. In the Zhengyang Hall of Tiankuan Peak, some people had already begun to decorate the place. The other big and small matters in the sect had also gradually quietened down, giving way to the most important event of the year. Lu Chen was still quietly waiting for the arrival of the night of the full moon. However, there were still many doubts in Lu Chen's heart about the mysterious spy of the devil cult secretly arranging to meet on the night of the full moon. Not to mention other things, this coincidentally happened on the same day as the most important event of the year in the Kunlun party. Could it be another coincidence? Lu Chen did not believe it. He felt that there might be some strange twists and turns in this matter that he did not know about. However, he still knew nothing about the spy of the devil cult, so the only thing he could do was to wait. At the same time, he was also wondering if he should take advantage of these few days to quickly go down the mountain and take Black Dog away from Kunwa City. At the very least, it would be better to throw him into the forest outside the city. No one could guess the various calculations in Lu Chen's heart. Everyone in the Kunlun party was busy in an orderly manner. Reverend Idol Month was in charge of the overall situation, but the person in charge of all kinds of miscellaneous and trivial matters was not him, but Reverend Idol Month's junior brother Zhuo Xian. As a Jin Dan friar, the second disciple of Hakushin Jinkuan, and also the sect head Reverend's junior brother, Zhuo Xian had a prominent reputation in the Kunlun party for many years. Most of the cultivators, including Reverend Yuanying, treated him with respect. Zhuo was also a very capable person. He was smart and capable, and he almost never made a mistake in handling big and small matters. He had always been deeply trusted by both Hakushin Jinkuan and Reverend Idle Month. On this day, when Zhuo walked out of the winter peak above the clouds in the sky, he turned his head and saw the entrance of his third junior sister's cave not far away from his own cave. White Lotus was standing there, looking into the distance in a daze. The wind and snow filled the sky, falling leisurely on the winter peak, which was like a wonder of the world. White Lotus was wearing a white snow mink coat. She stood there like a beautiful statue, so beautiful that it was suffocating. However, Zhuo was old and experienced, so he was not too surprised. He only smiled and said, "Junior sister, you're up so early?" White Lotus turned around. Her expression was cold, just like the cold snowflakes that filled the sky. She was polite but with a hint of alienation. She bowed to Zhuo and said, "Second senior brother, good morning." Zhuo nodded and said, "I have to go down the mountain to do something today. I might not come back during the day. Be careful on the mountain alone." White Lotus said, "Little sister knows. Senior brother, don't worry." Zhuo smiled. Just as he was about to turn around and leave, he suddenly heard Bai Lian ask, "Second senior, there's something I'd like to ask you." Zhuo stopped and said, "Junior sister, please say it." White Lotus said, "I heard that at the foot of the mountain, that is in the sect, there has been a big commotion recently. There is an evil faction spy who infiltrated our Kunlun party and killed an innocent disciple?" Zhuo was silent for a moment, and then nodded and said, "There is indeed such a thing. The disciple who died is called He Changsheng. His ancestor used to be a disciple of our Kunlun party. Later on his family declined. But when it came to his generation, it looked like he wanted to pull himself together. Unfortunately he met with such a thing." White Lotus frowned and said, "I think I have heard of He family once before, but I don't have much impression of it. But this evil faction kills people and does evil. Why don't we go and catch them?" Zhuo said, "We have already sent people to investigate. Unfortunately, the evil faction is treacherous. So far, we haven't found anything. Instead, we have caused a lot of trouble for no reason." White Lotus looked at him and asked. Zhuo was slightly surprised, but then he thought of White Lotus's family background and felt relieved. He said, "It's him. I heard that he hasn't been well recently?" White Lotus asked. Zhuo looked at White Lotus strangely. Usually this girl would rarely talk so much. But he still patiently said, "Yes, I heard that in the process of investigating he had some conflicts with the Su family in Kunwa City. Recently he was also caught by his master and went back to closed-door training. But how to say it, this time, it seems to be a blessing in disguise, right?" White Lotus was a bit surprised and said, "What do you mean?" Zhuo indifferently said, "I heard that the day before yesterday he used great willpower to subdue his inner demons. In his anger, he turned his grief into great strength and broke through the Jin Dan realm in one fell swoop. Now he is the same as me, a Jin Dan friar." He looked at White Lotus and faintly smiled. He leisurely said, "At his age, his future is really limitless." Chapter 202. The Kunlun mountain range was majestic and towering on the western continent. It had attracted the attention of countless heroes for thousands of years. At this moment, on a quiet street in Kunwa City, there were two men standing side by side. They were looking at the undulating mountain range from afar. One of them had an ordinary appearance. He was wearing an old robe that had been washed so many times that it had turned white. He looked like a scholar who had studied for many years but had achieved nothing. He looked at the mountain in the distance and suddenly smiled. However, he said to the person beside him, "Brother Chen, are they really not your people?" The man standing beside him was a familiar face. He was Chen He, who had appeared at the gathering point of the demon sect in the celestial city. At this moment, Chen He shook his head and said, "Brother Fan Tue, it is indeed not us. Actually, when we found out that the reincarnation array had appeared on the Kunlun mountain, we initially thought that it was the work of the spies from the western continent. Elder Gui was worried that you would be too hasty, so he asked me to come and take a look. The man called Fan Tue smiled. His eyes flickered as he said, "Thank you for your kind intentions, Elder Gui. I have troubled Brother Chun to make this trip." The two of them turned their backs to the Kunlun mountain and slowly walked along the street. Chun-Hee smiled and said to Fan Tue, "Then this matter is a little strange. It is not done by the Western Continent sect, nor is it done by the followers of the celestial city of the Middle Continent. The other sects are also far away from the Western Continent. It is impossible for them to come all the way here to interfere with the affairs of the Kunlun party. So who is the one who did this?" Fan Tue shrugged and looked helpless. He said, "Perhaps it is a spy who was planted into the Kunlun party long ago, but has lost contact with us? Ever since the battle in the Barren Valley 10 years ago, the elites of the Holy Sect have suffered heavy losses. We are leaderless and in a mess. Indeed, we cannot contact many people." Chun-Hee nodded and looked at Fan Tue. He said, "Brother Fan, the situation over the years has been difficult. However, you have persevered in the Western Continent and turned the tide. You have maintained the situation and gradually recuperated to recover your strength. That is why we are where we are today. I admire you very much. Even Elder Gui is full of praise for you." Fan Tue smiled and glanced at Chun-Hee. He did not reply. Chun-Hee continued, "But Brother Fan, from the looks of it, our holy church has indeed reached a point where we cannot continue to be in chaos any longer. Someone on Kunlun Mountain, who can use such a high-level magical power as the reincarnation formation, must be an important figure in our holy church. However, we know nothing about it. Even to this day, we have not been able to contact that person. Furthermore, after the incident, our first reaction was to confirm which sect that person was from. If we don't change this embarrassing situation, our holy church will definitely have no hope of reviving." Fan Tue said, "Brother Chun, there's no harm in speaking your mind." Chun-Hee clapped his hands and said, "Good, Brother Fan is a straightforward man. Elder Gui thinks highly of Brother Fan's talent and wishes to meet you and appoint you as the vice-hierarch of the Holy Church. I wonder if Brother Fan is interested?" Fan Tue's expression changed slightly. He looked straight at Chun-Hee and said in shock, "Deputy Sect Master?" Chun-Hee nodded and said, "That's right." Fan Tue said, "If I remember correctly, even during the Battle of the Barren Valley 10 years ago, our holy church only had the position of elder and not the hierarch. In reality, the Elders' Council of the Holy Church has been discussing matters for many years. The position of hierarch has been empty for hundreds of years, right?" "That's right." Chun-Hee smiled and nodded. Fan Tue's eyes flashed. "Then I don't understand what you mean by that, Brother Chun?" he asked. Chun-Hee said calmly, "Now is a time of crisis for the Holy Church. 3 of the 5 great elders died in the Barren Valley. A few years ago, Zheng Xianmeng and Fuyunji assassinated us. Elder Feng also died. Now only Elder Gui is left. Therefore, after much consideration, Elder Gui felt that we should break the old and establish a new one. We should appoint a new hierarch. This way, we can unify the Holy Church and end the current chaotic situation. All the sects in the world will work together to complete the great cause of unifying the 3 realms." Fan Tue took a deep breath. A moment later he said, "Then the position of hierarch," Chun-Hee said directly. "Of course it will be Elder Gui. In the entire Holy Church, only he can convince the masses." Fan Tue nodded. After a moment of silence he suddenly smiled and said to Chun-Hee, "If that's the case, your sincerity in giving me the position of deputy hierarch is great." Chun-Hee said sincerely, "Brother Fan, as long as you agree to it, you will be above everyone else. In the future, when the Holy Church succeeds, there will definitely be a place for you in the deity temple." Fan Tue said calmly, "Brother Chun, you are too serious. The deity temple is the residence of the elites of our holy church. I do not dare to hope for it. It is just that the matter that I have just discussed is of great importance and involves many people. I also have a large group of people under me. It is not something that I can decide on alone. Please allow me to carefully consider this matter for a period of time." Chun-Hee looked forward, his gaze slightly cold. However, he quickly replied politely, "Of course." The two of them walked forward together. As they looked at the bustling Kunwa city with its buildings, Chunhee suddenly said, "Then what about that person on Kunlun Mountain?" Fan Tue pondered for a moment and said, "Since the reincarnation array has appeared, that person must be a disciple of our holy church. As for the fact that we have no contact with either of us, that is probably the result of the chaos in the holy church over the past few years. But no matter what, with such a powerful fellow disciple here, we can't just ignore it." Chunhee nodded in agreement and said, "What Brother Fan said makes sense. That is what I think as well. Furthermore, that person might have done this to spread the news and try to contact us. I think he might be at the Kunlun party." At this point he did not continue. He simply used his hand to draw a random shape in the air. It looked like a circle, but it was a little curved and undulating. It was unknown what it was. However, Fan Tue clearly recognized this gesture. After looking at it, he nodded and said, "Yes, I will arrange for someone to go." Chunhee glanced at him with a smile and said, "Brother Fan, you are indeed impressive. It seems like you can even plant someone into a top-notch sect like the Kunlun party." However, Fan Tue did not look pleased. He only waved his hand and said, "This is nothing. Actually, a large sect like the Kunlun party has many disciples. It is not too difficult. However, at most, they will be the lowest-ranking servant disciples. It will be extremely difficult to recruit people from the higher ranks." Chunhee smiled and said, "No worries. We still have a long way to go. There will be a chance to let them know how powerful our holy church is in the future." The two of them smiled at each other, as though they had been good friends for many years. It was as though there were no grudges between them. They walked forward shoulder to shoulder, and walked past an inconspicuous and secluded alley on the side of the long street. In the deep and quiet alley, the signboard of the Black Hill Pavilion was still hanging on the door frame. It looked at the quiet alley alone, waiting for a customer that seemed like it would never come. Old Ma sat on his favorite recliner, his eyes half closed as he dozed off. Behind him, in the courtyard of the back hall, separated by a long and narrow passageway, Atsu was quietly lying there. On the other side of the courtyard was a large basin. There were many meat bones in it. Based on its usual habits, the abnormally gluttonous Atsu would have finished the large basin a long time ago. However, for some reason, there was still more than half of the food left in the basin today. Atsu was lying on the ground in the courtyard. Its expression was a little lazy and listless. It was as though even the meat bones had lost their attraction to it. On this quiet and lazy afternoon, it was as though the sunlight was gentle and powerless. At this moment, a soft cry suddenly came from the wall in front of them. Atsu's ears pricked up, and it raised its head to look up. Between the green tiles on the wall, the figure of a wildcat appeared. The wildcat carefully walked on the high wall. From time to time, it looked left and right. Suddenly, it saw the large basin of meat bones in the courtyard below. Its eyes suddenly lit up. Atsu looked up at the figure of the wildcat. Its only eye was glimmering. Then it watched the cat look around for a while. Then, it began to carefully jump down the high wall and walk towards the basin of meat. The wildcat was very careful. It kept looking around and naturally, it soon saw the black dog on the other side of the courtyard. Atsu stared at the wildcat closely, but it did not show any strange movements or expressions. It just slowly stood up. The wildcat was a little scared and took a few steps back. However, when it saw that Atsu did not have any intention of rushing over, it waited for a while and slowly became braver. The fragrant meat bones seemed to be particularly tempting, and it could not help but walk over there. The wildcat stared at Atsu while slowly walking towards the meat bones. The small courtyard was very quiet. There was no sound at all. In the depths of Atsu's eyes, there was a faint beautiful luster that lit up like a green flame. The wildcat knew nothing about it. Most of its attention was now on the basin of meat bones in front of it. After a while, it finally got to the edge of the basin. Then it could not bear it any longer. It buried its head and took a big bite. However, the wildcat still did not let down its guard. With the meat in its mouth, it immediately looked up at Atsu. However, Atsu still stood in the same place and did not move. The wildcat tried a few times and finally felt relieved. It meowed a few times and was overjoyed to start this hearty meal, until it buried its head and ate happily. It suddenly found that there was a shadow covering the top of its head. It covered its entire body. In an instant, the fur on the wildcat's body stood up. It raised its head with a scream, and saw that a black dog was already standing beside it. A single terrifying eye was flashing with jade-like flames as it stared intently at the wildcat. A terrifyingly large mouth slowly opened halfway, revealing snow-white and sharp fangs. The wildcat screamed in horror and jumped up to escape. However, suddenly, a dog's leg quickly pressed down from mid-air. With just one move, it was firmly pressed to the ground. The next moment, the dark shadow completely drowned and swallowed the wildcat. Chapter 203. There were many odd-job disciples in Kunlun Mountain. They were at the bottom of the hierarchy in this famous sect. They did most of the hard work, but they only received negligible rewards. What they hoped for was a very big dream. Most people were like this, but only a very small number of people could reach the sky in a single bound. To some extent, Lu Chen was actually one of them. However, there were not many people like Lu Chen. In the fragrance garden where he had worked before, there were still countless odd-job disciples who were still struggling to survive, unable to make a name for themselves. Zhang Ji was such an ordinary odd-job disciple. He had been in the Kunlun party for many years, but there had been no improvement. In the beginning, Zhang Ji had actually worked hard, diligently doing all the work that he could do, tenaciously persevering to do his best in the hard work, but even so, there were no opportunities falling on his head from the sky. Therefore, Zhang Ji gradually slacked off. He had been dissatisfied, wronged, and angry, but he was just an ordinary person. Other than his average ability, he was actually very afraid of death. So in the end, Zhang Ji finally became a wily old fox, and not the kind of madman that occasionally appeared. Because he had been in the Kunlun Mountain for a long time, and because he was experienced enough in the fragrance garden, in general, Zhang Ji's life among the odd-job disciples was not bad. However, a few days ago, he was at a disadvantage in a dispute with a person called He Changsheng, and he was knocked unconscious on the spot. However, the main character of this dispute was not Zhang Ji, nor was it He Changsheng. In fact, it was a few high-ranking aristocratic children, and the matter was later left unsettled. Zhang Ji was very angry when he was at a disadvantage, but one day after a while he heard something. He Changsheng had died. He died very suddenly, inexplicably, and it was said that he died very miserably. Zhang Ji didn't see it with his own eyes, but he heard all kinds of descriptions from the people around him. At first he was happy with the misfortune of others, but after a long time, when he calmed down, he also felt sad for the death of a rabbit. Moreover, they heard that the murderer was very likely to be a sorcerer from the devil cult, which was even more inconceivable. To be honest, Zhang Ji had known He Changsheng for a long time. Although their relationship was ordinary, he really did not think that this person would have anything to do with the devil cult. After a period of time, when he had almost forgotten about this matter, another person named He brought him over and interrogated him for a long time. What did He Changsheng do? Why was the sect still investigating this murder case after he had been dead for so long? Zhang Ji didn't know why, but when he was confused, he actually felt a little jealous and envious. He knew that if he died in an accident, it would never attract the attention of the Kunlun party. Not many people would even pay attention to it. After all, they were all odd-job disciples. Zhang Ji was such an ordinary person, a selfish person with some human emotions. He had dreams before, fantasizing that one day he would become an immortal and his name would shake the world. Of course, these things seem to be impossible now. But who didn't want to be different? Well, if there was a chance to come. Every day when Zhang Ji woke up and went out, he would look at the house that He Changsheng once lived in, which was now empty and abandoned. Then he would have a thought in his heart, thinking that probably now, other than those who wanted to catch the evil sect's evil people, he was probably the only one left who still remembered He Changsheng. This was really a very strange thing. Until that morning, when there were still 6 days before the sect council meeting, Zhang Ji did not walk out of the door like usual. Until noon, when a passerby noticed something was wrong and reported, The guarding disciples who rushed over then discovered that Zhang Ji had taken the same path as He Changxing. He was dead in his own house. Heard that his death was quite tragic. Heard that the house was full of blood. Also heard that this time it was done by the damn devil cult sorcerer again. Not sure if the devil cult of the Three Realms paid special attention to the Kunlun party, maybe they should. But now that the sect council meeting was about to be held, and He Changxing's murder case had not been solved, the tragedy of killing Zhang Ji happened again, without a doubt, in front of everyone in Kunlun Mountain. It gave the Kunlun party another hard slap in the face. The devil cult's savagery was outrageous. The one who suffered the most from this slap was, of course, the leader of the Kunlun party, Reverend Idle Month. As the leader of the sect, such things happen continuously. If it happened once, it could be said to be an accident, but if it happened again, it could really make people doubt his ability. Therefore Reverend Idle Month was furious. His angry roar in the Zhengyang Hall of Tianquan Peak could be heard not only from outside the hall, but even the people at the foot of the mountain could hear it. However, although Reverend Idle Month was extremely angry, there were some things that could not be changed by his will, and some people were not afraid of his anger. A few Yuanying realm Zenrans led by Baichao Tang were very dissatisfied with this matter. They said bluntly that the devil cult was so rampant. Could people still live in the dignified Kunlun in the future? Did everyone still want their face? Why couldn't they catch the murderer after so long? Was it because the murderer was too cunning, or were they incompetent? These questions were like knives stabbing at Reverend Idle Month, making him tired of dealing with them. He was indeed unreasonable in this matter. No matter what, as the leader of a sect, it was his natural responsibility to protect his weak disciples. Even Hakushin Jinkuan did not know what to say even if he wanted to speak up for him. In order to make up for his mistake and also to show his attitude, Reverend Idle Month, who was furious, pulled a big net and started a round of investigation in the Kunlun party, vowing to catch the abominable murderer of the devil cult. For a moment, the Kunlun party was in a state of panic, and it was a mess. Lu Chen was a little far away from the chaotic situation, so he was not disturbed too much. Flying Goose platform was quiet enough, and Su Qingjuan's past power was enough for him to stay there. However, Lu Chen was obviously not very satisfied with this. After all, he still had his own things to do. And the most important and also the most puzzling point was, who was the murderer who killed Zhang Ji? No one in this world knew better than Lu Chen how He Changxing died, but Zhang Ji's death really confused Lu Chen. Of course, the murderer could not be himself, but it did not seem to be the traitor of the devil cult that he had been searching for. The mysterious traitor of the devil cult had already drawn a map and set a time. No matter how he thought about it, Lu Chen felt that he could not think of a reason for the traitor to suddenly appear and kill again. During this period of time, shouldn't he be hiding more discreetly? Lu Chen had a lot of doubts in his heart, so he found a reason to go to the house where Zhang Ji lived on the same day to take a look. From the outside, the house seemed to be similar to the one He Changxing lived in. They were both the most ordinary rooms for odd job disciples. Because of the murder case, there were disciples guarding outside the house, and ordinary people were not allowed to approach. When Lu Chen stood in the distance and looked, there was a mountain breeze blowing. Soon he smelled a bloody smell. Lu Chen did not go near there, he only looked from afar. If it was really not that the mysterious traitor suddenly went crazy and did something big again, in fact, Lu Chen did not believe this. Then the only possibility was that there was a real devil cult elite outside that had infiltrated into Kunlun Mountain. Towards this possibility, Lu Chen's expression did not even change. But just when he was about to turn and leave, his eyes suddenly looked somewhere. Over there was a very large and dense forest. Lu Chen took a long detour and entered the forest from the other side. He then walked towards the central area of the forest with ease, and came to the big rock that he saw last time. He looked around and saw that all the trees were as dense as before. The air was fresh, but other than that, there seemed to be not much other than some collapsed stone pillars and slabs. Lu Chen searched the area, but he didn't find anything suspicious. He also searched the tree bark, but he didn't find anything. Just when he thought that this new devil cult sorcerer did not seem to know the rules, and did not leave any token pattern to prove his identity, Lu Chen suddenly discovered another place in the forest that was somewhat different. It was that big rock. He walked up and carefully searched for a long time. Finally, near the soil, he saw a pattern. A big tree pattern with 2 leaves and 1 flower. Please show yourself and reminisce about the past. This was the meaning that Lu Chen could see in the new devil cult pattern. Then Lu Chen's expression turned somewhat ugly. The matter was very obvious. He had used the reincarnation formation, which was rarely circulated, to set up a formation to kill He Changsheng. This matter had simultaneously attracted the attention of the traitor of the devil cult and the other devil cult members outside Kunlun Mountain. They had even extended their hands into this place. However, Lu Chen also sensed a trace of abnormality from this strange situation. That was, the devil cult people outside of Kunlun Party did not seem to be aware of the situation of this devil cult spy in Kunlun Party. Therefore, regardless of the difficulties, risking the danger of being attacked by such a powerful and famous sect like Kunlun Party, they still wanted to show their existence, intending to make contact with that spy. This made Lu Chen very surprised, because he clearly remembered, when True Lord Tianlan told him about this matter, he clearly and directly explained to him that devil cult spy was a person who had received all of the devil cult's destiny. Such a person, how could the devil cult not know of him? Actually, after something had happened, they still thought of another way to guess and find him? This matter, there must be something wrong somewhere. Chapter 204. That day, after Lu Chen returned to the Flying Goose platform, he went to the edge of the cliff and looked at the vast sea of clouds and the magnificent world. He sat alone for a long time. It was not until the sky turned dark and the moon rose that the moonlight shone on his body, drawing out a lonely shadow on the ground behind him. Similarly, the moonlight shone on the depths of the Kunlun mountain range, on the 4 strange peaks between the clouds in the sky. On one of the winter peaks, snow still danced in the sky. 2 figures stood side by side on the mountain path under the moonlight. They were the headmaster of Kunlun, Reverend Idlemonth, and Zhuo. Reverend Idlemonth did not look too good, and his expression was somewhat grim. From time to time he would raise his head to look at the top of the winter peak. At the peak of the mountain, the howling snowstorm was wrapped into a ball. It was the cave where the legendary Hakushin Jinkuan cultivated. When will Master come out to see me? Reverend Idlemonth asked Zhuo. Zhuo looked embarrassed. Senior Marshal Brother, I really can't answer you. Master's closed-door cultivation is a big matter. How can I ask how long it will take? Idlemonth snorted. A trace of anxiety flashed across his face. He paced back and forth on the mountain path, looking a little upset. Zhuo advised him, Senior Marshal Brother, don't be too anxious. It's just Qiandeng, Mingzhu, and a few others making a fuss. Can they really overturn the sky? Besides, no matter how bad the situation is, isn't Master still here? When the time comes, as long as Master appears, he will be able to intimidate everyone. I'm sure they won't dare to say another word. Idlemonth nodded. It was obvious that he had the same thought in his heart. However, he quickly sighed and said, Junior Marshal Brother, what you said is not without reason. However, I still feel that something is not quite right this time. I want to discuss it with Master. Moreover, you see, for the past few years, Master has always attended every sect council meeting. If you suddenly don't attend this year, coupled with those evil sect killings, I'm afraid it will cause people to gossip and deliberately sow discord between our master and disciple relationship. Zhuo was silent. He and Reverend Idlemonth had been brothers for many years. They were both disciples of Hakushin Jinkuan. Of course, he understood why Reverend Idlemonth was so agitated. Back then, when the Kunlun party was deciding on the next leader, to be honest, among the Yuanying Zhenren Idlemonth was considered an outstanding figure, but he was not at the stage where he could look down on the others. There were at least 5 or 6 other Yuanying Zhenren whose cultivation and strength were not weaker than his, and there were even 1 or 2 who were obviously better than him. But in the end, the one who became the Kunlun party's sect leader was still Idlemonth. The biggest reason for this, everyone knew, was their common master, Hakushin Jinkuan. All these years, Reverend Idlemonth was actually doing quite well in the position of sect leader. He was diligent and conscientious, but he could not convince the masses. There was never a lack of people who said strange things in the open and in the dark. This time, the incident of the devil cult killing people was getting bigger and bigger, and the criticism of Xian Yuzhenren was getting louder and louder in the sect. It was no wonder that Xian Yuzhenren was so angry and restless. In a few days' time, it would be the annual sect council meeting. Almost all the important figures in the Kunlun party would be present. At that time, it was almost expected that the evil sect killings would be brought up again. Then the doubts about Reverend Idle Month would also be raised. In front of all the important figures in the sect, of course Reverend Idle Month could not afford to lose his face. He felt that since ancient times, there had never been a sect leader of the Kunlun party who would suffer such humiliation. However, if it was like the previous years, when Hakushin Jinkuan attended and sat in the Tianquan Peaks Zhengyang Hall, no matter which faction of people wanted to talk nonsense, it would depend on whether they had the guts to do so or not. However, as early as a few months ago, Hakushin Jinkuan had told the both of them that he might not want to attend the sect council meeting this year. Firstly, he really did not have anything important to attend. He was just there to help his disciple. Secondly, everyone felt that Reverend Idle Month had done a good job in the position of sect leader. His position was more or less stable. Therefore, he was too lazy to make the trip, and simply went into closed-door cultivation. That being said, it was not wrong, but no one expected that during this period of time, the incident of the devil cult would suddenly happen, causing a storm in Kunlun sect. From top to bottom, it was restless. Those Yuanying stage Taoist masters seemed to have found an excuse to mock and ridicule Kunlun sect non-stop. Under such circumstances, Reverend Idle Month felt that it was better to invite her master to attend the sect council meeting again. Therefore, she came to the Winter Peak to ask for her master's help. However, according to Zhuoxian, Hakushin Jinkuan had been in closed-door cultivation for many days. The both of them did not dare to disturb Hakushin Jinkuan's quiet cultivation. They could only wait on the mountain path. However, after waiting for a long time, there was still no sign of Hakushin Jinkuan coming out. Reverend Idle Month was anxious. Suddenly, she said to Zhuoxian, "Junior brother, I have many trivial matters to attend to in the sect. I am very busy and rarely come here. Could it be that now that master is in closed-door cultivation, even you can't contact him at all?" Zhuoxian smiled bitterly and said, "Senior brother, to be honest, I really can't contact master now. But if you are really anxious..." He paused for a moment, then lowered his voice and said softly, "Perhaps junior sister has a way?" "Little junior sister White Lotus?" Reverend Idle Month was stunned. "What way does she have?" Zhuoxian said, "Master only accepted her as his last disciple when he was old. In addition, she is a rare five-pillar talent. Naturally, he loves her deeply. Aside from instructing her wholeheartedly when he has free time, he has also handed the transcendent artifact, the Wind Speech Compass, to junior sister White Lotus. If there's an emergency, you can ask junior sister to use the Wind Speech Compass, and perhaps you can contact master." Reverend Idle Month was suddenly enlightened. He clapped his hands and said, "That's right. How could I forget about this? Junior brother, quickly bring me to little junior sister's cave abode. I'll ask her to contact master for me." Zhuoxian was a little hesitant. He looked at the sky and said, "Senior brother, isn't it too late now?" Zhuoxian looked at the night sky. Indeed, it was already late at night. However, he quickly shook his head and said, "It's urgent. Let's settle it as soon as possible. Junior brother, lead the way. I'll talk to little junior sister." Zhuoxian nodded and said, "All right. Senior brother, follow me." The two of them walked down the mountain path again. After 15 minutes, they arrived in front of the two cave abodes. Zhuoxian walked over and knocked on the door before shouting loudly. The stone door of the cave abode did not move at all. Zhuoxian frowned and called a few more times, but there was still no response. Reverend Idle Month was a little surprised. He walked over and asked, "Is it not in the cave abode?" Zhuoxian shook his head. "It shouldn't be. It's so late. If I go out, I'll be breaking the sect rules. I'll call again. Maybe it's a little girl who is too sleepy to hear." As he spoke, he raised his hand again and knocked on the door while shouting. He did this for a while, but the cave abode was still tightly shut. There was no response. Zhuoxian turned around and looked at Reverend Idle Month. At that moment, both of them had a question in their minds at the same time. It's so late. Where could the little girl have gone? The moon shone brightly in the dark night, shining on Kunlun Mountain in the shadows. On the dark mountain path, a little girl was walking contentedly. For someone of her age to walk on an empty mountain path in the dark and cold night, it was very strange no matter how one looked at it. This little girl was, of course, White Lotus. Her beautiful face was calm. Looking at the direction she was walking in, it was towards Flying Goose platform. Her clothes fluttered in the night wind, and the high collar on her neck could be seen from time to time. That was to cover up some of the wounds. Although they were basically under control, the injuries that Lu Chen had inflicted on her that day had left a very strange wound on her neck. In the end, it still hadn't completely healed. However, for some reason, White Lotus did not seem to have too much hatred for the person called Lu Chen. This was somewhat unusual for her, who had been arrogant since she was young. Even she was a little surprised. Perhaps it was because although that person was cunning and vicious, she did not have to pretend in front of him. She could say whatever she wanted and do whatever she wanted. This was really very satisfying and comfortable. Oh, there was also that black dog. In fact, the blood food secret method was not as important as she said it was. After all, she had accidentally learned it when she was young. It was not a secret method unique to her. If she really did not care about it, then she would not care about it. Anyway, she would go and bother him first. Looking at the helpless and depressed expression of the person called Lu Chen, it was still very pleasing. White Lotus thought of this in her heart. A smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. She quickened her pace and walked towards Flying Goose platform. Just as she was walking, her expression suddenly stiffened, and her footsteps immediately came to a halt. A trace of surprise and caution flashed across her eyes. At the same time, in a dark corner in front of her, 3 rays of green light suddenly emerged from the darkness. They were like dark green flames. They were like 3 eyeballs embedded in a strange and vicious face. A dark aura gushed out from that corner. White Lotus frowned slightly and took a step back. Then, she stared in that direction with a trace of vigilance on her face. The green flame swayed slowly and gradually approached. White Lotus quickly saw that it was a 3-eyed monster shaped like a small snake. It was baring its teeth at her, revealing its terrifying fangs. The 3 green lights were 3 strange green eyes that were growing on the head of that strange creature. Hiss 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 hiss. A strange sound came from the front. A trace of uneasiness flashed across White Lotus's heart. She stared at it with her guard up. But at this moment, she suddenly discovered something strange. The 3-eyed, green-eyed strange insect was staring at her, but it did not look at her face, her eyes, her hands, or her feet. The 3-eyed strange insect's eyes were staring at her neck the whole time. The neck that was wrapped by the collar, and had an unhealed wound. Chapter 205. It was late at night. Lu Chen was already lying on the bed. His eyes were closed, and he looked like he was asleep. However, he seemed to wake up from his dream all of a sudden. He sat up abruptly, and a strange black flame burned in his eyes as he scanned his surroundings. When familiar things came into view one after another, Lu Chen realized that he was still in the familiar small wooden house. He sighed softly. He was in a daze for a moment. Then he leaned against the wall and pushed open the window. A ray of moonlight that was as clear as water descended from the sky and shone on him through the windowsill. Lu Chen looked at the bright moon in the sky and realized that it was rounder than yesterday. Perhaps in a few days' time, it would become round again. The moonlight on the windowsill was as white as a veil. The cold wind blew past, cold and lonely. Lu Chen looked at the lonely night outside the window and suddenly thought of the figure sitting on the windowsill the day before yesterday. At that time, White Lotus did not look like a vicious and mysterious person. Instead, she looked more like an innocent and cute girl. However, just as he thought of this, Lu Chen immediately shook his head and threw this dangerous thought to the back of his mind. That White Lotus was innocent and cute? There must have been many people who had this kind of thought and died in her hands. At this moment, Lu Chen's expression suddenly changed. In his eyes, a black flame burned again. Somewhere in the distance, there seemed to be a throbbing power that was very familiar. He had been searching for it for a long time. It was the strange three-eyed blood-devouring bug. Lu Chen immediately became spirited. After pondering for a moment, he pressed his hand on the windowsill and floated out. Then he took advantage of the night and blended into the darkness, flying towards the mountain path. On the winter peak in the snowstorm, Perfected Idle Month and Zhuoxian stood at the entrance of White Lotus's cave abode and looked at each other. Immortal Idle Month could not help but ask Zhuoxian, "Where did she go? There's a curfew in the middle of the night. If Junior Sister is still on Kunlun Mountain and someone sees her, it'll be a crime of disrespecting the sex rules." Zhuoxian smiled bitterly and said, "Senior brother, I really don't know. Little Junior Sister is extremely intelligent and has always been personally taught by Master. I don't usually talk to her much." Taoist Master Idle Moon raised his head to look at the moonlight, and then looked at the even more beautiful spectacle of lightning under the moonlight, surrounded by the violent snowstorm. Then he exhaled deeply, and then sighed again. Lu Chen moved forward in the darkness, heading towards the strange aura in the distance. That aura was very strange. For some reason, it actually triggered the power of the black fire that was hidden in the deepest part of his body. Lu Chen even had a faint feeling that it was the hunger of the black fire and the divine black flame board. They were like hungry and terrifying hunters, and their prey was the blood-devouring worms. As long as he could kill the blood-devouring worms, he could absorb even more terrifying aura of the undead. The dark aura was too obvious. It was like a beacon guiding Lu Chen's direction. However, when he rushed to the mountain path, even though Lu Chen had always been bold and calm, he could not help but change his expression. On the dark mountain path in front of him, there was a petite figure standing there. Her hands were raised high, and there were traces of ice and snow flowing from her fingertips. On the ground beside her, Lu Chen actually saw the corpses of several blood-devouring worms. Almost all of the blood-devouring worms were tightly wrapped in ice and snow. They looked extremely stiff. They were probably frozen to death. At this moment, White Lotus also seemed to have seen Lu Chen. She raised her eyes slightly and looked at him. Then she suddenly laughed and said, "How is it? Am I considered powerful?" Lu Chen glanced at the corpses of the blood-devouring worms on the ground, and could not help but smile bitterly. Then he nodded and said, "Powerful? Ha." White Lotus seemed to be happy all of a sudden. She put down her raised hands and walked towards Lu Chen. Then she said casually, "I originally wanted to go to the Flying Goose platform to find you, but I did not expect to encounter such strange things on the way. They were extremely vicious, so I simply killed them all." "Admirable." Lu Chen nodded and said to White Lotus. White Lotus laughed and kept walking. At the same time she said, "Are your words sincere or not?" Lu Chen thought for a while and said, "Your cultivation method might just be able to restrain this kind of monster. But no matter what, it is still powerful." White Lotus laughed. At this time, she had already walked in front of Lu Chen. Then, she smiled sweetly and said, "Then why are you here? Are you here to pick me up?" "Stop dreaming. How could I come to pick you up?" Lu Chen snorted at White Lotus's words. Just as he was about to say a few more words to mock her, he suddenly saw White Lotus's body suddenly shake a few times. She closed her eyes and did not make a sound. It was as if she had suddenly become a walking corpse and fell down. Lu Chen was shocked and subconsciously reached out to hug White Lotus's body. But as soon as he touched her body, Lu Chen's expression changed greatly. It was like the roar of darkness in the night, suddenly exploding in front of him. A wave of darkness surged over and instantly wrapped around his body. This feeling was the aura of the strange three-eyed worm. It could not be wrong. Lu Chen's expression changed several times. Suddenly, he stretched out his hand and tore open Bai Lian's right sleeve with a ripping sound. Immediately, a strand of black qi appeared on her abnormally white wrist. At the same time, a twisted, protruding mark suddenly sprang up from the back of her hand. Then, it crazily rushed up, and it looked like it was about to rush past her shoulder and into her chest. Lu Chen snorted coldly. He suddenly grabbed White Lotus's shoulder with one hand, and then fiercely clawed down. His 5 fingers instantly turned black. Then black flames gushed out from his hand and directly burned into White Lotus's flesh. White Lotus lost her voice and cried out in pain. But at the same time, the black gas that was rushing up suddenly stopped. It seemed to have seen the most terrifying thing in the world. For a moment, it did not dare to rush forward. Instead, it turned around and fled. But at this time, Lu Chen grabbed White Lotus's shoulder with one hand. His other hand followed the root and directly wrapped around White Lotus's elbow. After a moment, there was a sudden scream. A strange three-eyed worm rushed out from White Lotus's wrist with its fangs and claws bared. After the strange worm broke out, White Lotus moaned and directly fell to the ground. It looked like she had fainted. And Lu Chen looked at the evil blood-sucking worm that flew into the air and seemed to want to escape. He suddenly reached out and directly grabbed the body of the blood-sucking worm in the air. The blood-sucking worm roared and turned its head. It seemed to be completely enraged. Just as it was about to attack Lu Chen, there was suddenly a deep and boundless black flame that was like an iron curtain that suddenly burned. It burned on Lu Chen's hand. It also burned on White Lotus's arm. Even from her neck, there were a few strange black lights that lit up. Under such a pincer attack, the blood-sucking worm had no way out. It was instantly burnt and melted in that raging black flame. Everything quieted down and the tranquility of the night was restored. Lu Chen stood in the same place and muttered to himself for a moment. Then he bent down and picked up all the carcasses of the blood-sucking worms. Carrying the unconscious White Lotus, he turned around and left with large strides. Lu Chen brought White Lotus back to his wooden house. In fact, he didn't really want to do this. But first of all, he really didn't know where to send this girl. Even if he knew White Lotus was a member of Kunwa City's Bai clan, it was the middle of the night and there was a curfew, so he naturally couldn't send her there. Everything could only wait until the sun rose tomorrow. Apart from this, Lu Chen had another reason why he couldn't give up on White Lotus. It was the sudden appearance of the strange three-eyed worm. Why did this vicious worm, known as an ancient killing weapon, suddenly besiege White Lotus? He felt that he had to get to the bottom of this matter. White Lotus's body, or the foundation of White Lotus's cultivation, was far more powerful than Lu Chen imagined. At first, Lu Chen expected White Lotus to sleep for half a day, but in fact, White Lotus only woke up after an hour. What happened? After seeing that White Lotus had woken up, Lu Chen didn't bother to inquire about her well-being, and directly asked her. White Lotus also seemed very straightforward. She said, "I don't know. I'm asking about those strange three-eyed worms. Why did they suddenly attack you? I don't know either." White Lotus sat up with some difficulty. Then, like how Lu Chen sat most of the time, she leaned against the wall next to the window and said, "In any case, there were no signs at the beginning. Several of them suddenly rushed out and almost swallowed me alive." Lu Chen furrowed his brows, clearly a little puzzled. On the contrary, White Lotus seemed to be more at ease. Taking advantage of this rare free time, she looked at the somewhat messy little wooden hut, and then looked at the night sky on the windowsill. Her face showed a trace of a gratified smile. Probably because of this quiet scenery, White Lotus's heart finally calmed down. Then, she concentrated for a moment and suddenly said, "But I saw a strange phenomenon." Lu Chen's spirit was shaken. He stared at her and said, "What is it?" White Lotus said, "Just now, all those strange three-eyed worms, I don't know why, from the beginning to the end, all of them seemed to be staring at my neck, as if there was a peerless delicacy on my neck." Lu Chen's expression slightly changed. He said in a low voice, "Your neck?" White Lotus smiled and said, "It's the wound that you caused and hasn't healed yet. Why do I have a feeling that although those strange worms don't look smart, perhaps they are very interested in the thing that you cultivate with. One day, they will come for you again." White Lotus said threateningly, as if she was pronouncing a sentence to Lu Chen. Lu Chen was silent. He thought to himself, could it be that those blood-devouring worms also have an abnormal desire for the power of the black flame? He then thought of the unimaginably terrible dark power that had appeared in the depths of Kunlun during the great earthquake in Kunlun. Lu Chen stared at White Lotus and did not speak. White Lotus felt a little uncomfortable under his gaze. She frowned and asked, "What are you looking at?" Lu Chen sighed and said, "Young girl, Put on your clothes first. Chapter 206. White Lotus stared blankly for a moment, then suddenly cried out in alarm, subconsciously raising her hands to cover her chest. However, her right arm was injured, and she had only raised it halfway before her face paled. She groaned in pain and directly drooped down. In the end, she could only use one hand to cover her chest. But very quickly, just as she was about to yell at Lu Chun for being despicable and shameless, White Lotus suddenly discovered that most of her clothes were still intact. The only thing missing was her injured right arm. The sleeve from the shoulder down had been torn off, revealing her white jade-like skin. It was an exceptionally moving sight. But at this moment on her arm, there were still a few wounds. The flesh on her wrist had split open, and there were a few startling black fingerprints on her shoulder. At this time, Lu Chun opened his mouth and said, "What are you screaming for? Isn't it just a torn sleeve? I kindly advised you to put on some clothes to prevent you from catching a cold. Why do you look like your entire body has been seen by someone?" White Lotus spat and looked at Lu Chun with disdain. "You're a man and you're taking advantage of my tongue. Aren't you embarrassed?" Lu Chun rolled his eyes and said, "Hey little girl, speak clearly. What do you mean I took advantage of you? Just now, I risked my life to save you from the mouth of that strange three-eyed insect." White Lotus sneered and said, "Don't give me that. You stinky men, do you think I don't understand? Don't you all see that I am beautiful and want to take advantage of me? You have all kinds of dirty thoughts. Do you dare say you don't?" "I don't." Lu Chen's expression was solemn as he said to White Lotus, "I have to make this clear to you. I don't have the slightest bit of that kind of thought." White Lotus looked at him and said, "Then let me ask you, what do you think of my appearance? Is it considered beautiful?" "Of course not." Lu Chun paused for a moment. It seemed that he still couldn't deceive his conscience. He muttered and said, "All right, you are indeed beautiful, but I am not interested. Only a ghost would believe you. There isn't a single good man in this world." Lu Chun said, "You're just a little girl. Where did you learn so many messy things? I won't talk about those cruel and vicious methods. You're so young. What do you know about these matters between a man and a woman?" White Lotus said angrily, "Don't look down on me. I know everything." Then he sneered and said, "If I didn't know all this, I'm afraid I would have been fooled by you stinky men." Lu Chun looked her up and down and suddenly laughed. He shook his head and didn't say anything. White Lotus didn't know why, but she felt more and more uncomfortable being stared at like this. She became more and more annoyed and said angrily, "What are you looking at? Haven't you seen a beauty like me?" Lu Chun sternly said, "It's fine if you scold me for my low skill, cruel methods, and low moral character. In any case, we've fought and killed several times these past few days. We're enemies and not friends. But no matter what, you can't slander me for liking a little girl like you. I'm not interested in you." White Lotus was furious. She slapped the windowsill and said angrily, "Tell me clearly, what do you mean by this? You're saying I'm ugly?" Lu Chun said, "You're not ugly, but I'm not blind. I'm just not interested in you." Seeing that White Lotus was so angry that her face turned pale and looked like she was about to get up and fight, Lu Chun hurriedly waved his hand and said, "Hey, hey, hey. Do you have any upbringing? You're still a girl at such a young age. You're always talking about killing people at the slightest provocation. Can you listen to me properly?" White Lotus angrily sat back down and glared at Lu Chun. "Tell me, what do you mean by your words?" Lu Chun shrugged and said, "I don't mean anything. I do like women, but they have to be mature women. You're just a 10-year-old girl. How could I be interested in you?" White Lotus was stunned for a moment. Her expression softened a little, but then she revealed a suspicious expression. She looked at Lu Chun and said, "Are you serious?" Lu Chun laughed and said, "Why would I lie to you? In short, if you're worried, you can leave now. I won't send you off." White Lotus thought for a moment. She put on her clothes and got off the bed. She said, "I'd better go. You're unreliable. I want to stay away from you." Lu Chun didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He stepped aside and shook his head with a smile. "Then you'd better keep your word. Stay away from me in the future. Don't come looking for me. White Lotus walked a few steps and suddenly turned her head to look at him. She said, Have you slept with other women before? Lu Chen was stunned. Then he nodded calmly and said, Yes. Disgusting. White Lotus said. What do you know? Lu Chen scolded with a smile. White Lotus thought for a moment and said, I don't believe that the women you slept with before were more beautiful than me. What makes you say that I'm not as good as them? Lu Chen was speechless for a moment. After a moment, he waved his hand to drive away White Lotus. He said, You're getting more and more outrageous. Is this something a little girl like you can ask? White Lotus was unmoved. She sneered and said, Can a little girl kill and bleed like me? Lu Chen rolled his eyes. White Lotus said to him, Tell me clearly and I'll leave immediately. Otherwise, I won't feel comfortable if I don't understand this matter. Lu Chen looked at her elegant and beautiful face. She was like a fairy. Suddenly he had a kind of illusion. After a moment he sighed. He thought that this world was really full of evildoers. Eccentric people could be seen everywhere. All right, you can leave after I say it. Lu Chen said to her, Women and girls are different. Besides a face, there are many parts of a woman's body that are equally charming. You're still young and don't have it yet. So, I like other women, but I'm not interested in you. You don't have to worry that I'll do something indecent to you. Can you understand what I'm saying now? White Lotus stared at him. Lu Chen looked calm and met her gaze. The two looked at each other for a moment. White Lotus suddenly blushed. She reached out and hugged her chest. She spat and said, Shameless. Vulgar. Shameless. After saying that, she turned around and ran away like a wisp of smoke. Only Lu Chen was left in a daze. He was stunned and speechless. After a long while he said blankly, What did I do this time? She called me shameless, vulgar, and shameless again. There were only 5 days left until the night of the full moon. The Kunlun party could be said to be tight on the inside, but loose on the outside. The sect council was closely related to the majority of high-level cultivators. However, for the vast majority of the lowest-level disciples, it was like two different worlds. The head of the Heavenly Soldier Hall, Dukanjinren, was in a good mood recently. The biggest reason was, of course, his beloved disciple He had recently rushed to the Jindan realm and became a Jindan friar. In terms of age, he was not even 30 years old. Although he was a few years older than Masato Kahara's disciple, Su Qingjun, at his age, to be able to practice to the Jindan realm was still an astonishing achievement. His future achievements could absolutely be said to be limitless. At least, in the praises and comments of the elders, the evaluation of He was almost exactly the same as that of Su Qingjun. Yuanying was within reach, and there was hope for a true monarch. For the younger generation of cultivators, there was almost no higher evaluation than this sentence regarding their talent, innate aptitude, and potential. It was also because of this that Dukanjinren was very proud. However, in this happy mood, there were still some flaws. For example, his most supported senior brother, Idle Month, was not having a good time recently. Another example was his newly advanced disciple He. Although he had cultivated to the Jindan realm, he did not look ecstatic and looked solemn all day long. Dukanjinren, of course, was well aware of the reason for this. And to be honest, these two things were caused by one thing, and that was the evil devil cult killing people. The first thing had just calmed down, and the result was that it happened again. These evildoers of the devil cult were simply rampant and lawless. It was hateful that they were as timid as mice and did not dare to come out to fight. They only dared to hide in the dark corners and plot against those almost powerless odd-job disciples. It was despicable. Dukanjinren had always been the most staunch supporter of spiritual master Idle Month. Chapter 207. To a Jindan friar. In terms of cultivation realm, it could already be said to be extremely powerful. Looking at the entire cultivation world, countless cultivators, countless families, wherever he went, he could be considered as an elite. And with Jindan friar's sharp senses, perhaps if they really fought, he might not be a match for the more powerful Yuanying realm Jinren. But for a Yuanying Zhenren to suddenly approach Jean Dan Friar without anyone noticing, that was also extremely difficult. But right now he suddenly met such a person. A huge and fat figure suddenly appeared beside him, so close at hand. At that moment, it was like the blood in He Yi's entire body had frozen, and he practically instinctively let out a furious roar as he retreated. At the same time, he swung his arm and struck out with his strongest Dao art and divine ability. A bright light suddenly lit up, pierced through that shadow. His body, like an arrow leaving the bow, retreated. Looked like he was about to break through the darkness. But the strange thing happened again. That huge figure like a shadow followed, directly followed up, and following what seemed to be a casual sound of a sleeve fluttering. An instant later, all of He Yi's supernatural powers were all broken, dissipated into nothingness. Heaven and earth were silent. All living things were silent. A gust of aura came from the shadow in front of He Yi. That tall and sturdy figure had a mountain-like imposing manner, like covering the sky and covering the earth, pressing down on him. He Yi's body shook violently, staggered back. Suddenly his legs softened. He almost knelt down. But he tried his best to hold on, until that tall and fat man lowered his head. A pair of eyes landed on his face. Like a sudden clap of thunder, instantly exploded. He Yi's mind went blank. In that instant he directly sat on the ground, his entire body drenched in sweat, his face pale, almost devoid of blood. The pressure, like landslide and tsunami, swept over. He felt that his entire body's flesh and bones seemed to be out of control. Perhaps the next moment it would collapse and explode. His heart was also extremely shocked. This was the first time in his life that he met such a terrifying person, almost not like a mortal, like a deity. Deity. At that moment his eyes suddenly widened. He stared at the tall and sturdy figure in front of him. For some reason, even though he was right in front of him, even though that person seemed to be looking at him, his mind still couldn't reflect that person's face. Was this the might of a true monarch of the divine transformation stage? He didn't dare to look anymore. He was afraid that if he held on any longer, he would really turn into ashes. He could only lower his head and kneel on the ground with a thud. He said in a hoarse voice, "Disciple He pays respect to. Immortal." It was rare for Su Qingjun to get up early in the morning. After she greeted Lu Chun, she hurriedly went down the mountain. Her destination was her home in Kunwa City. The reason was also very simple. The Su family at the foot of the mountain had sent word that Sumo's condition, which had originally stabilized, had worsened in the past 2 days. Watching Su Qingjuan's receding figure, Lu Chen's expression became somewhat cold. In his heart, he recalled the mysterious corpse watcher in the dark grave. The mind-manipulating technique was a very overbearing divine ability. It seemed that he didn't show any mercy to Sumo that day, and it really hurt her very foundation. Standing on the Fian platform that had once again become quiet, Lu Chen's expression fluctuated and his brows were tightly knitted. The situation had already begun to become more and more chaotic. Lu Chen even had a feeling that it was beyond his expectations. Moreover, he always felt that there were some variables in this matter that he hadn't thought of before. Who was that so-called traitor of the devil cult? What was he planning to do by lurking on the mountain of Kunlun? But why didn't the people of the devil cult seem to know of his existence? All these doubts intertwined with each other, making him feel as if he had fallen into a mess. He only felt that everything in front of him was chaotic, and he couldn't see what was going to happen in the future. In another 5 days, it would be the night of the full moon. According to the agreement made by the traitor of the devil cult, he and Lu Chen would meet on that night. Perhaps that would be the time when the truth would be revealed. But would things really be so simple? Perhaps because he had been in the dark for too long, Lu Chen always subconsciously felt doubtful. He always felt that there was no such simple thing in this world. Sometimes he also knew that what he was thinking was actually wrong, but the habit he had developed over the years always made him involuntarily think this way. Perhaps it was better to make some preparations first? Has the damned Baldy come back? At noon that day, Lu Chen also came to Kunwa City and asked Old Ma in the Black Hill Pavilion. Seeing that Lu Chen had come, Atsu was very happy. It ran to his side and jumped up and down, appearing to be very affectionate. Seeing Atsu's appearance, Lu Chen also smiled and kept reaching out to stroke its head. He then raised his eyes to look at Old Ma. Old Ma shrugged and said, I don't know, but since he promised to come back before the night of the full moon you mentioned, it should be in the next few days. Lu Chen nodded and said, Good. If he comes back and contacts you, find a way to notify me, or tell him to come find me. I have some things to ask him. Old Ma's eyes flashed and he said, What's wrong? Is there something? Lu Chen hesitated for a moment and said, There are some things I feel strange about, so I want to ask him. Old Ma seemed to want to ask more questions, but when he saw Lu Chen's expression, he quickly swallowed his words. After a while he nodded and said, Good. Don't worry. I'll inform you immediately if there's any news. Lu Chen smiled and nodded at him. He then squatted down and played with Atsu for a while before saying, I'll send Atsu away today. I don't want to leave it here with you. Old Ma asked, Where do you plan to send it? Lu Chen said, I don't have a fixed place. I'll just find a mountain forest a bit further away from the city and let it stay there. After the night of the full moon, I'll finish my business and come to find it. Old Ma frowned and said, You'll just leave it alone in the mountain forest? Will something happen to it? Lu Chen laughed and patted Atsu's head. Then he stood up and said, It's okay. This dog has become stronger recently. It will survive. Right, Atsu? He lowered his head and asked Atsu. Atsu wagged his tail and barked a few times, as if he was responding to his words. Old Ma glanced at Atsu and suddenly made a gesture to Lu Chen, asking him to follow him to the side. Then he looked slightly serious and said to Lu Chen, What's wrong with this dog? Lu Chen said, There's nothing wrong with it. It's quite good. Old Ma snorted and said, Don't lie to me with this kind of nonsense. There must be something wrong with Atsu. That's why you're so sneaky. By the way, there's something I haven't told you yet. It's also related to Atsu. Lu Chen was stunned for a moment. Looking at Old Ma's serious expression, he couldn't help but be a little surprised and said, What happened? Old Ma took a deep breath and said in a low voice, Recently, I found that some animal corpses often appear around this house. Most of them are wild cats and dogs. Occasionally, there are birds, chickens, and ducks. They all died in the same way. Their throats were directly bitten by sharp teeth, and then they bled to death. Lu Chen was silent for a moment. His expression also became cold. He glanced at Old Ma and said, What do you think? Old Ma pointed at Atsu in the distance and said, Did it do it? Lu Chen said, I'm not in the city and I didn't see it with my own eyes. I don't know, but Atsu has never done this kind of thing before. Old Ma looked at him deeply and said, You really don't have anything to hide from me, right? Lu Chen met his gaze and suddenly smiled, saying, Of course there is. Old Ma was furious and said, Damn it. I knew you weren't honest. Tell me. Lu Chen waved his hand and said, There are some things that I don't need to tell you. In short, you have to believe me. I won't do anything bad to you. Old Ma looked at him for a while and suddenly sighed and said, Well, be careful. Lu Chen looked at him, and his eyes gradually became gentle. He gently patted his shoulder and suddenly said, Old Ma, after this, why don't we both retire? He smiled and said, These days are quite boring. Old Ma was silent for a moment and said, Okay. Lu Chen took Black Dog out of Kunwa City. Along the way, he saw the Su family's mansion in the distance. He could see that although the mansion looked calm on the outside, everyone inside seemed to be in a hurry and had solemn expressions. He looked at it for a while, and then turned around and left. After leaving Kunwa City, Atsu was even happier and kept running on the wide road. Lu Chen didn't keep walking along the road, and quickly led it to the wilderness. As they walked, they arrived at the foot of a nameless hill more than 10 miles away from Kunwa City. There was a forest on the hill, and the area was vast. There was no one around, which was exactly what it meant to be a wilderness. Lu Chen called Atsu over and stroked its head. He then squatted down and stared at Atsu's eyes. Atsu suddenly became nervous and took a step back. Lu Chen shook his head and said softly, You've already drunk the heart's blood, and your bloodline has been stimulated. It's almost impossible for you to live like before. The night of the full moon will be the time for you to transform and advance. At that time, No one will be able to help you and you can only rely on yourself. Since ancient times, the sacred beasts of the southern part of the chaotic land have all narrowly escaped death like this. If you can't pass this trial, then find a place to die. Lu Chen quietly said to it. Atsu lowered its head. As if it had sensed something, a complicated light suddenly appeared in its eyes. It slowly leaned forward, stuck out its tongue and licked Lu Chen's hand. Lu Chen glanced at the towering Kunlun mountain in the distance and said, "In the next few days, I also have to work on that mountain. It should be very dangerous. I'm not sure if I'll survive." You see, people like us who have been shadows for a long time are all like this. We always feel like we're in danger of dying. Tell me, what's the point of living like this? Am I right, Atsu? Lu Chen sat on the ground and said to Atsu. Atsu slowly walked over and squatted down next to Lu Chen. It looked like it was sitting side by side with him. The sky unknowingly darkened. The afterglow of the setting sun shone on their backs. "I hope we can still meet after the night of the full moon," Lu Chen said. Woof. Chapter 208. Amidst the clouds in the sky, on the winter peak, Hakushin Jinkuan's 3 disciples, Perfected Idol Month, Zhuoxian, and White Lotus gathered in Zhuoxian's cave abode. They stood side by side and looked at the ancient plate on the table in front of them. Compared to the 2 senior brothers who had been famous for a long time, White Lotus looked like a child at the moment. However, her temperament was cold and otherworldly, and she had a different kind of bearing. However, White Lotus did not seem to be in a good condition today. Her face was a little pale, and she looked a little haggard. Perfected Idol Month and Zhuoxian saw this. Perfected Idol Month looked at this little junior sister with a rare look of pity in his eyes. "Little junior sister, are you not feeling well?" White Lotus shook her head and said softly, "No, thank you for your concern, senior brother." Perfected Idol Month nodded and said, "All right, in that case let's see Master." White Lotus agreed. Then, under the gazes of Master Xianyu and Zhuoxian, she walked up to the ancient plate on the table. She gently brushed her palm over it, and used some unknown method. Suddenly, smoke rose from the center of the ancient plate. Then there was the sound of a violent snowstorm. The howling was violent, as if it was right next to their ears. A vast expanse of white snow appeared on the ancient plate. This Dharma treasure was naturally the wind speech plate that was previously given to White Lotus for safekeeping. Perfected Idol Month, and the other 2 looked solemn as they bowed. A moment later, a deep and slightly hoarse voice suddenly came from the depths of the seemingly endless snowstorm. "What's the matter?" Perfected Idol Month took a step forward and cupped his hands. "Master, Disciple Idol Month wishes to see Master." The snowstorm blew past as if it would never stop. The 3 could only see the snowstorm dancing in the sky, but there was no trace of a human figure. But strangely, Hakushin Jinkuan's voice was still very clear. "Speak." Perfected Idol Month did not dare to be negligent. He quickly reported to Master the major events that happened in the Kunlun party recently, including the matter of the evil cult secretly killing the odd-job disciples, which caused the anger of the other Yuanying Jinren, and caused him to fall into a somewhat embarrassing situation. At the end of his speech, Taoist Master Idol Moon's complexion turned solemn. He looked at the snowstorm in the wind whisper plate and said, "Master, given enough time, this disciple will certainly be able to get to the bottom of the devil cult. But the sect council meeting is too close, and Qiandang Mingzhu and the others are pressing too hard. This disciple is afraid that there will be some troubles at that time. I'm here to sincerely ask Master to attend again this year, so as to deter the rascals and prevent those people from being too arrogant." The wind speech plate was silent for a moment, and then Hakushin Jinkuan's voice was heard. "Yes." Perfected Idol Month was overjoyed and quickly bowed to thank him. Then Hakushin Jinkuan said again, "I'm not dead yet, Qiandang Mingzhu, and the others shouldn't be like this. Is junior brother Tianlan back?" Perfected Idol Month hesitated for a moment and said, "I've followed Master's instructions. Every year, 1 month before the sect council meeting, I'll specially write to Martial Uncle Tianlan, asking him to return to the mountain to discuss the important affairs of the sect. In previous years, Martial uncle always declined, and this year is the same. He only said that Zhang Xianmeng has been busy recently, and may not be able to come back in time. The voice in the wind speech plate was silent for a moment, and then said, "Then let's not care about him, but the matter of the devil cult plotting against the disciples of Kunlun is indeed too arrogant. Don't you have any clues? If that's the case, then it's your fault. No wonder others are pointing fingers at you." Perfected Idol Month hurriedly said, "Master, you've misunderstood. This matter is a great insult to our Kunlun by the evildoers of the devil cult. As the sect leader, I won't just sit back and watch." Now among the two cases, the first case of the murder of He Changxing was strange and experienced. It was indeed difficult to investigate, but after days of continuous investigation, I found some clues, especially the source of the cinnabar used in the murder case. With this as an opportunity, I'll be able to find the melon by following the vines. As for the second case of the murder of Zhang Ji, it happened recently, but the technique was much worse than the first case. I already have some clues. It was the work of the spies that the devil cult planted in our Kunlun. Now once the evidence is conclusive, we'll immediately arrest them and present them to the sect. Hakushin Jinkuan's tone was cold, and said, "In times of emergency, there must be a thunderous method." Perfected Idol Month's body trembled slightly, and then he took a deep breath and said, "Yes, I understand." The sound of the wind and snow gradually subsided, and the wind speech plate also gradually returned to normal. There was no longer the scene of wind and snow in the sky. White Lotus silently walked forward, wiped the magic treasure, and put it away. Then, she turned around and nodded at Taoist Master Idol Moon and Zhuoxian. Perfected Idol Month's expression was amiable, and he smiled at White Lotus and said, "I've troubled little Shimmy." White Lotus's expression did not change much, as if it was too cold like frost. But she still bowed slightly to this eldest Xixiang, whose age could even be her grandfather, and said, "You flatter me. If Xixiang needs anything in the future, just let me know." After saying that, she bowed to both of them and walked out. Perfected Idol Month and Zhuoxian watched her leave. After White Lotus's figure disappeared, Perfected Idol Month suddenly frowned, and said, "I heard that although the power of the magical technique recorded in the Book of Snow is extremely great, it can also affect a cultivator's will and temperament. These days I haven't seen little Shimmy many times, but I can feel that her temperament seems to be getting colder." Zhuoxian nodded and said, "Probably so. This mysterious book was obtained by Master in his later years. You and I have long succeeded in our cultivation techniques, and we don't have the supreme divine ability of Master in the deity transformation realm, which allows us to do as we please, so it's not suitable for us to cultivate. On the contrary, little Shimmy should have just entered the sect, like a piece of unpolished jade, but she can directly cultivate this kind of supreme magical technique from the beginning. It's also a rare opportunity." Xian Yuzhenren nodded and said, "That's right. Junior sister is a peerless genius who was born with the 5 divine pillars. Moreover, Master has been so attentively training her. Her future is really limitless. Maybe in a few decades, my position as the sect master will be taken by her." Zhuoxian's body trembled slightly, and a strange light flashed in his eyes. After a moment he said in surprise, "Xixiang, why do you say that? You're in the prime of your life, and you're good at governing. You should be advancing bravely. Why do you need to think about these things? Besides, I think Master only accepted little Shimmy as his last disciple because he loves her talent. In any case, little Shimmy is still young, so how can she bear the responsibility of the great Kunlun lineage?" Perfected Idol Month smiled, then reached out and patted Zhuoxian's shoulder, and said with a smile, "What Shimmy said makes sense. I was thinking too much. But Master must have made arrangements for these things, so it's not up to us to think too much." Zhuoxian said, "Xixiang is thinking too much. I think the person Master relies on the most is still you. Otherwise, why would he hand over the heavy responsibility of the sect master to you?" Perfected Idol Month made a sound of and didn't say anything else. He just slowly walked out of the cave with his hands behind his back. Zhuoxian looked at his back and slightly frowned, as if he was thinking about something. Then he also followed him out. The next day, at the foot of Kunlun in front of the mountain gate, an execution rack was suddenly erected. The disciples of the sect and the people in Kunwa city, who were far away, quickly received the news. In an instant, many people swarmed over and surrounded the mountain gate. There were all kinds of people in the crowd, including many itinerant cultivators and cultivators from other sects who were passing by. There were even ordinary mortals and villagers who lived in the nearby cities or villages. All of them rushed over to watch the commotion. In a hidden corner of the crowd, there were two men who didn't seem to attract any attention. They were Fan Tue and Chen He from the Three Realms Demon Sect. At this moment, the two of them did not look good, especially Fan Tue. His face could be described as ghastly pale, and his fists were tightly clenched under his sleeves. His gaze was fixed on the person who was tied to the wooden rack. Chen He sighed softly and pulled Fan Tue with his hand without batting an eyelid. He used a little more strength in his hand. Fan Tue turned his head and looked at him. After a moment, he slowly nodded and said in a low voice, "I'm fine." Chen He was silent for a moment, then said, "We have also underestimated the Kunlun party." Thinking about it, for such a large and famous sect to be able to prosper after 5,000 years, they must have their own strengths. We should be more careful when dealing with them in the future. A hint of embarrassment flashed past Fan Tue's eyes. He didn't say anything and only clenched his teeth. At the other end of the crowd, Old Ma was also standing in the crowd. Strangely, Lu Chen, who was dressed in casual clothes, was also standing beside him. However, the two of them didn't show any signs of conversation. It was as if they were two strangers who didn't know each other. They didn't even look to the side. Their gazes were also looking at the execution rack at the foot of the mountain gate, looking at the person who was tied to it. Looking from afar, that person's limbs were tied up, and his head hung limply in front of his chest. There were many bloodstains on his clothes, and he looked a little wretched. From time to time, whispers could be heard from the surrounding crowd. Old Ma stared for a moment, then suddenly said as if he was talking to himself, "I remember that the Kunlun party had also captured many spies from the Devil sect in the past, but they had never done it in public like this, right?" His voice wasn't loud, and probably only Lu Chen, who was standing a few feet away from him, could hear him. However, Lu Chen's expression didn't change at all, as if he didn't have any reaction to the fatty's words. It was only after a while that Lu Chen let out a faint smile. Without turning his head, he said in a low voice, "That sect leader must have been forced into a corner recently." Old Ma grunted, a hint of disapproval in his eyes. Just as he was about to say something, there was a commotion in the surrounding crowd. The two of them looked over, and saw a person walking out from among the Kunlun party disciples at the Kunlun mountain gate. That person had a dignified aura, and his footsteps were steady. It was he. At this moment, he was holding a sharp long sword in his hand, walking toward the execution rack step by step. The surrounding crowd instantly became excited. He stopped in front of the execution rack, and suddenly looked around. Then he shouted in a deep voice that shook the entire place and reverberated in front of the Kunlun mountain gate. "Spies from the Devil sect have committed heinous crimes. Everyone has the right to punish them." You're tuning in to the Echoes of the Heart YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.